Hi everyone, good morning and thank you for joining India Science Festival on this Saturday morning. I will just allow a couple of our participants to trickle in the Zoom room as well as via YouTube. If you could just give us a minute, settle in, we'll begin the workshop shortly. But thank you for joining in. It's wonderful to have you all here. Okay, I think we're good to go. A very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Saturday morning. My name is Shruti Sundaresan, and on behalf of the entire team at India Science Festival, I welcome you all to the PhD program booth at India Science Festival. Now, India Science Festival is a public engagement platform that aims at bringing science to your homes. The idea is to engage with a society on different aspects of science, technology, innovation, research, science communication, and so on. And in our attempts to bring science to your homes, we have curated a wonderful lineup of events, which include talks, panel discussions, workshops, demonstrations, competitions, contests. And the festival is online and absolutely open to everyone. We don't charge for any of our events. They're free to attend. And of course, while we would have loved to meet you all and celebrate science with you in an offline setting, we have to keep the pandemic in mind and ensure that everyone gets to celebrate science while in a very safe setting. So that's why the festival is online and it's being held on Zoom. All of our events are recorded, and if you miss them, you can also catch them on YouTube. The idea of having a PhD program booth is to make sure that our attendees leave our workshops and events feeling upskilled and informed. And we have a three-part program booth in which we have 3 events or 3 workshops. And this PhD program booth is in association with our knowledge and research communications partner, researcher.life under Cactus Communications. So a big thank you to Researcher Life for facilitating these workshops for us. We're very grateful for the same. Just like to inform all our attendees that the Q&A tab is open for you to drop in your questions. We'll be taking audience questions towards the end of the session. So if you have any queries, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. And with that, I'd like to introduce the first workshop facilitator of the day. Can I please request Shane to turn on his video? Thank you so much, Shane, for joining us. A very quick introduction is that Shane is the head of multimedia production at Impact Science at Cactus Communications. Shane has over 5 years of experience in language editing, scientific communication, and publishing, and has edited over 1,000 manuscripts across various subject areas in the life sciences, and has collaborated with over 7,500 researchers to help them realize their dream of publishing in high impact factor journals. Shane, it's an absolute pleasure to host you at India Science Festival. Thank you for taking the time out, and I'm sure that our attendees are very, very eager to attend the rest of the session. So I'm just going to quickly switch off my audio and video and hand over the stage to you. Thank you so much.
Very good morning to all of you. I'm guessing most of us are from India. If anyone who's joining us from any other part of the world, could you perhaps react by perhaps, I don't know, sending a thumbs up or something, so I know that you're from some other part of the world. But wherever you are, Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's an absolute pleasure to be speaking to all of you. I hope all of you can hear me very clearly and see me, right? And what I'm going to do very quickly is I'm going to share my screen. And I hope my screen is visible to all of you.
Yeah, all good.
Yep. Just give me 1 second. Let me just expand this a little bit. I think we can get started. Right. So before we get started, what I would like to do perhaps is maybe ask everybody a question, right? And you can answer this maybe in the questions tab, or you can answer this on the chat that sort of exists as a part of this webinar. But it's a very honest question. I mean, we're going through, hopefully we're at the end of the third wave of this pandemic, essentially. Now, how many of us believe in the merits of vaccination? That's my first question, right? You can maybe react on Zoom to let me know, right? That's my first question. So how many of us believe in the merits of vaccination, right? And my second question essentially is uh, how many of you have instances of members of your extended family who don't perhaps understand the basis of vaccination? And if that's the case, right, how easy or difficult uh, have you found it uh, to explain to somebody, especially a loved one or a distant relative, about how vaccination works and how it can probably not cause any sort of damage that they've heard about from any sort of source of misinformation? And how difficult or how easy has it been? And honestly, that's my question to start the day off with. I'm just going to open chat. Yeah. How easy or difficult has that been? And when you think about that, question, I think the topic of this entire talk becomes all the more relevant, right? I think Shruti's done enough of it, has done quite a fantastic introduction for me as a speaker, right? I essentially started out as a freelance editor, right? Honestly speaking, I'm currently the head of multimedia production and impact science, and I work with publishers and researchers, but I didn't start out that way. I'm actually a molecular biologist. I don't have any training in marketing. I don't have any training in journalism, and I haven't done a degree in mass communication. I was very much a molecular biologist and a researcher. That's how I started up. And eventually I had a knack for writing and editing. And that's how I moved into becoming a freelance editor. I transitioned into becoming a managing editor. And I worked with multiple different authors. And today I work with multiple different publishers, authors, academic societies. And we help solve for communication challenges that they have, right? We help solve challenges both for authors who want to put their work out there. And we also work with publishers and academic societies who want authors to know that they are available for them to be able to publish and disseminate their research. So it works both ways. And I've seen both ends of that spectrum. And perhaps that's what I wish to share with everybody as a part of this conversation today. And I call it a conversation, I don't call it a webinar, right? Before I start, I'd like to give out a few disclaimers. The first being that since this is the PhD booth of the India Science Fest, all of you probably already know how to draft and shape a manuscript or are in some stage of learning how that process works. So honestly speaking, I probably am not going to be able to tell you how to write your manuscript better because you already know how to write your manuscript. What your key takeaway from this session should be is that there is significant merit in being able to represent your research in alternate content formats. If you leave this session today with an understanding that being able to convert your research paper, your research poster, your thesis into another written form, if you leave the session believing that you can turn it into any other written form, which can appeal to a mass audience, then I think we will have achieved something together at the end of this session. So this session definitely doesn't talk about how you should write your manuscript. This session talks about, first, the importance of research communication, and second, it's going to take you through how to write a particular form. It's going to take you through a particular form of science writing, right? So with those disclaimers out of the way, just a few ground rules. I will be answering as many of your questions as I can. I've actually kept aside 15 minutes at the end of this session just to do that. If I can't answer all your questions today, I'll probably send them across to Shruti over an email, and then we can take them and I'll send the answers across an email. Maybe she can get in touch with you. Secondly, like I said, this is an interactive session, so please react, share, put your comments down in the chat box. I may not watch them while I'm going through the presentation because that will just extend the time that we take to have this conversation. But go ahead, do that. Be a part of this conversation. And yeah, like I said, it's going to be pretty anecdotal. You're going to see stuff on the slides, but I generally don't read off my slides. I just go ahead and tell people stories as I go along, right? So with all of those sort of ground rules out of the way, let me begin. So my next question, right? So I've asked about vaccination. I've asked about how difficult it is to explain the concept of vaccination to somebody who doesn't want to do it and has no background in science, can't understand how it works. My next question, right? We figure that out, right? And I'm hoping I've sort of elicited some sort of response in all of you in the sense that it is difficult, right? Because most people don't understand science. My next question, effectively, is then, what in everybody's opinion is, effective research communication? What is effective research communication, right? And to help you answer that question, I'm going to ask you another question. Do you remember this? Any of you remember this? You can say yes or no in the chat. Yeah. But now, when I show you this on screen, sorry about that. When I show you this on screen, that's Isaac Newton looking at the apple that's fallen on the ground, right? So that equation that we're looking at, right? It represents essentially what Isaac Newton was able to discover, the force of gravity, right? And it's captured in the form of an equation. But how many of us remember that equation? How many of us who are non-physicists remember that equation? Quite a few, maybe, only a few. But when you look at the image itself, right, that one story, that one anecdote, it's embedded, it's etched in our minds. And that's how we remember most of us remember Isaac Newton's contribution to the progress of science. And that, in its essence, is the beauty of effective science communication. If you think about all the great scientists that we have, if you think about all the great scientists in this country, as well as all over the world, all of them have these beautiful stories and beautiful narratives associated with their work, and that's how we remember them. It is later in life that we go on and we, through our passion for the subject, discover the details of what they actually studied and what they actually discovered. But it all starts with the story. It all starts with the narrative. And it's that narrative sometimes that hooks us on to the fields that we are currently engaged in, right? So then my question to everybody is, when scientists talk, why is it so jargon heavy? Why is it so, why does it work that way? Because when you look at this, for example, when you read this paper, again, I'm going to ask everybody on this session, how many of you can tell me what this study was all about? I mean, I'm sure you can figure out what this is by just reading the title, but can you tell me specifically what this study has led to? Yes, somebody says vaccine, but can you tell me which one specifically? Because it's very relevant to the Indian context. This study actually talks about the Covishield vaccine that we eventually all received. I'm hoping which eventually all of us received when we were all getting vaccinated at the end of the second wave. But just look at the language in which it is written, right? How many people all around us would have benefited from this study had this not been translated into, say, a research news story or a tweet that somebody put out, or perhaps a government mandate that explains that these are the vaccines and that's how they work? Not a lot, right? Not a lot. Probably epidemiologists, virologists, microbiologists, molecular biologists, maybe just that group of people would have understood, but nobody else. And therein again lies the value of research communication. Because traditional science writing, right, is dry, it's an indomitable stack of words, is what I've realized over time, right? And it's some of the most dense writing that you will perhaps ever come across in your life. It's filled with jargon. And what you don't realize is, on day one, when you enter a lab and you start your work with a group, with a research group, and it eventually works its way into the thesis, you realize that by the end of that process, you've completely changed your vocabulary. You've completely changed your vocabulary. You no longer talk, or at least when you communicate about the craft that you're passionate about and you specialize in, the way in which you communicate, it becomes so jargon heavy. It becomes so laden with acronyms and terms and terminologies that only you and your perhaps a specific circle around you can understand. And I've done that myself. I mean, I remember there was a time where I could have a conversation with somebody and barely use any words in English, which the third person would understand, because I'd be talking about specific lines that I was breeding, right? And specific techniques that I was utilizing essentially to make a discovery of a particular gene. You can literally sort of hide away in that entire kind of world of jargon and knowledge that you've built up. And a lot of us are proud to have that body of knowledge in our minds. There's absolutely no reason not to be. It takes a lot of skill and effort to get to that point, right? But if you make a discovery and only very few people get it, right? How much of a difference can that discovery truly make? Concomitantly, if you communicate your science to somebody, only a very specific group understands it or engages with it, then has it really been communicated well enough? And will it ever have the impact that you are looking for as an individual? So, my opinion, and this is painfully true, I wish I could have told you that in 8 years of being in this line of work, I wish I could have told you that, science today has a greater narrative than it did before. It does, yes, it does have a slightly greater narrative, but I think a large part of everything we do seems to lack storytelling and a narrative. And those elements become really, really important if you are ever going to showcase the importance of your scientific discoveries. And the reason as to why modern science, or a large part of modern science, lacks storytelling is because we are always in this rush to publish. It's associated with all the benefits that we could get. It's associated with all the jumps that we can make in our career, right? This whole beeline to get your paper published, or this mandate to have publications, right? It robs us, sometimes, in my opinion, at least from what I've experienced, it tends to rob us of the perspective that we need to tell the story of the science that we have pursued. It robs us of the perspective we need to talk about the joy of discovery, right? And it hasn't always been that way. Narratives have always existed. I mean, one of my personal favorites was the discovery of the DNA double helix, essentially, right? The way in which it was discovered, the back and forth that happened with the people who were involved, the manner in which perhaps Rosalind Franklin was kept out of it, which to me now seems like a humongous crime, right? But it builds narrative, it builds intrigue, and it helps you remember. It helps you remember the landmark breakthrough that a group of people made. So again, these narratives have existed in the past, and that's the answer to this question. And you'll find it in any of these, categories that I'm going to show you in the next slide, right? You'll find it in the story of scientific discovery. You're going to find it in the story of inspiration for somebody's research. For example, if you think about Archimedes' principle, right? The way in which he sits in a bathtub, the water falls over, and then suddenly he goes, Eureka, right? And we still use that word Eureka. It has such a strong association after hundreds of years, right? Then you have, of course, the aspect of science used as a tool to solve problems. If you listen to the narratives of the various different vaccines that have been developed by these modern pharmaceutical giants, the work that's been done by the Oxford Group, the work that's been done by Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca had a play in some of these things. You listen to their stories, or the way they tell the story of how they went ahead and, discovered a vaccine that could at least stem the tide of this pandemic that we're all in, right? Then, of course, you have stories of impact. Our discovery sincerely improves people's lives in various spaces and strata, right? And of course, then you have the story of the quest, this insurmountable mountain that somebody had to sort of traverse to arrive at a conclusion or get to a point where that they were able to make a scientific discovery. And last but not least, scientific narrative makes its way into scientific fantasies and fiction, right? I don't know how many of you have watched the Denis Villeneuve's Dune, which came out late last year. Fantastic piece of science fiction filmmaking, right? Which again talks about exosuits that people wear in an extremely harsh climate, which does not waste more than a thimble of water that is perhaps passed by the body. Absolutely fascinating concept, but very much drawn from the real life spacesuits that NASA makes its astronauts wear, and also the way in which the International Space Station works to recycle water to the greatest extent possible. If you haven't ever read or heard about how the International Space Station actually uses and recycles water, I think it's worth your time, because it gives you a good glimpse into how we'll deal with our natural resources as we move into the future. So give that a listen or a watch whenever you get the time. Trust me, it'll be worth it. Moving on. So what is the role of these narratives, right? The role of these narratives, or a narrative type of information, it forms the basis, the fact that you have a narrative associated with your science. It'll aid the way in which you write it down. And secondly, it forms the basis of information presentation in formats that are non-traditional, right? And why is that important, right? Why is this important? It's important because through your traditional format of communication, right, it's one way, right? You're writing that paper. Most of the time, you're writing that paper in line with the instructions that you received from your principal investigator or head of your department. You're writing that paper for publication in a specific impact factor journal. You've obviously done a lot of homework about what sort of papers get published and how they're written, what sort of language the peer reviewers perhaps might prefer, what sort of structure they'll have. And of course, your paper must be in the format that it needs to be submitted in, otherwise it's going to get rejected straight off the bat. So traditionally, the journal article is one-way communication, right? It is a single format content, and it has only a limited engagement. So who is going to engage with your scientific paper? Of course, it will be somebody from the editorial office who will screen it, think that it's worth going through to a peer review process. Then, of course, you'll have the peer reviewers who will engage with that manuscript. Of course, sometimes they'll give us a lot of heartache They'll ask us to change a bunch of things and get back on further details, some of which we may not have the infrastructure to provide. So they'll engage with it. You'll make your changes. It gets published. And then who engages with it? Maybe just a limited group of people, maybe members in your lab, members in your department, maybe some members in your college. And if you're presenting at perhaps a symposium, then folks in an allied field of science who may take an interest or may want to be a collaborator. But even then, it's quite rare for people to hit it off just based on the entire contents of what you've presented at a symposium, right? So those are the limitations of the traditional format, which is the manuscript, right? I call it the manuscript. You write a manuscript, abstract introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusions, references, all of that stuff. However, if you look at, say, non-traditional formats, right, with the adoption of enhanced content formats, it changes. Because you aren't just then creating one form of content, right? The idea with being able to adopt a better or an alternate form of science writing is that it allows you to create content formats in the form of, say, blog articles. It allows you to create sometimes video content or script video content that you can have produced. It can help you create podcasts, which is generally quite easy to get executed, actually, if you ask me, right? And what it does then is that it allows for multiple channels through which people can engage with your science. If nothing else, being able to summarize your paper well and being able to put it out on LinkedIn can actually bring about a lot of engagement from people who may see potential in working with you in the future, right? And if it's really out there and it's done really well, it's going to get into the minds of peers, the general public, which I'm going to try to maybe help you through today when we end this session, or even more importantly, it could reach the desk of policymakers, right? Your MPs and MLAs who might generally take an interest in the scientific advancements that you've made and how they can benefit society. So overall, investing in alternate content formats through a different approach to science writing allows you to engage with different audiences, with wider audiences, right? And that, in its sense, is the benefit of being able to kind of look at your research from a different perspective, from a larger perspective. So yeah, it's two-way communication. People can talk to you. People can ask you basic questions you've always wanted to answer about your research. Multiple content formats, which means they can absorb it in different ways depending on the time that they have available to them. Right. And again, you can bring about greater engagement and greater interest. And believe it or not, today it is the journals and publishers that are realizing the value of this. They realize now that it isn't enough to only publish something in the form of a manuscript. If you actually think about, say, top-notch publishers, you think about Nature, you think about Lancet, you think about Scientific American, you think about all the top journals in the field. All of them are at the very top, not just because they publish manuscripts. They're at the very top because they do a lot more around the manuscript. They go the extra mile to contextualize the importance of research through science writing in different formats. And that essentially is what kind of is a realization that they made. And of course, now all academic societies and all journals are trying to do now. They're trying to eke out a budget in their, in their annual cycles, where they can invest specifically in being able to perhaps put out infographics for papers, visual summaries. In some cases, I think they request authors to submit, say, video summaries of the research that they've done. They expect authors to provide plain language summaries of what they've done. I don't know how many of you have come across this format of a plain language summary, right? And of course, if some of you have ever submitted to an Elsevier journal, then most of them now ask for graphical abstracts, right? Just one snapshot that can explain your study. Can be difficult to do, but it's still a requirement, right? Because even they realize it's not enough to just put out content in that format anymore. You need to engage with more people, right? And they don't just do this through alternate content formats. They've created a very vast social media sort of ecosystem, and they are constantly investing in ways in which they can grow their sphere of influence by way of something we call thought leadership. So that's been the motion, and all of this is based on, again, representing somebody's science accurately, but in a different way, in a different style, right? So there you go. I mean, when it comes to academic societies and publishers, that's why they want to do it. That's why even they invest in it, right? So it's not just you as a researcher who's interested in doing it. Even they want to do it because they know that that's what's going to help them stand out. And in a lot of cases, actually, if you see, journals tend to offer a free infographic or a sort of plain language summary or a layperson summary to share with a larger group, right? They tend to do that as a way of incentivizing being able to publish with them, right? So that's the whole picture, right? That's the context I'm giving you guys before I move into the meat of it. And then, of course, there's something called altmetric. I don't know how many of you have heard of altmetric, but altmetric is a real-time bibliographic metric that tells you how many people have engaged with your tweet about your paper, or how many people have read about your paper. And altmetric score is actually a real-time metric as to how your research is performing in the real world. Does it have pickup? Right? So all manuscripts that are published in a digital domain have an altmetric score, and it's a much faster metric that comes about. Like impact factor is something that's accumulated over a period of time, but altmetric actually happens real time. And the more people talk about your paper, your altmetric score sort of shoots up. So it's actually, in a way, it's a more holistic view. And a lot of major publishers have begun to adopt altmetric. In some cases, publishers have devised their own metric to talk about real-time bibliographic metrics, right? So sort of increasing altmetric is also something that you can't achieve only through publication. You can increase altmetric by, representing the content in different formats. So yeah, these are the guys who really want to, who've jumped onto the bandwagon. There's Nature, there's ACS, Wiley, Elsevier. Elsevier, of course, has come up with something called Plumex, which works slightly differently. And again, altmetric is supported by essentially the presence of visual components with the manuscript, or the plain language summary, or the research news story that's written along with a manuscript itself. So, and it's very easy to influence. You can actually increase the altmetric of a published paper by just updating a social media post saying, hey, I published this in this journal, in this issue, it's going to come out, check it out here, and give everybody a small little link at the end of your tweet, or the end of your Facebook post or your LinkedIn post, and automatically you'll see your altmetric score jump up. And altmetric score is something that people do refer to these days. There's a wider acceptance of it, in addition, of course, to impact factor. So how quickly are non-traditional formats catching up, and how is science writing aiding that? Well, it's catching up really fast, and science writing has a big sort of role to play in that entire equation, right? And I can tell you from personal experience, because I've been involved in creating these infographics that you're looking at for the Royal Society of Chemistry, the Pain Journal, for clinical orthopedics and related research. And I constantly work with Elsevier and Wiley to create videos, write scripts down based on scientific papers, which kind of amplify the reach of somebody's research, right? So before I get into the science writing aspect of it a little bit, how can you as a researcher utilize any of these formats? Well, if you are a researcher and you want people to know about what you're doing, the first place you have to be on is Twitter, right? Tweet a summary of your paper on a personal handle. Make sure that you post with, and get on Instagram. Even Instagram is really popular these days. Facebook, of course, because it's Facebook, you should have some presence. And LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great place, honestly, to be able to engage with peers and those who are interested in the work that you're doing, right? And yes, if you want to be able to improve your science writing, at the very least, I would suggest you start maintaining a personal blog of sorts, where you are able to at least contextualize your research for anyone who isn't an expert. Start there. Maybe if you start there and you work your way up, you will eventually figure out the way in which you need to perhaps write your research down in a way that anybody can understand. And of course, one of the thumb rules that a lot of people apply is, if you write down a piece of content about your research and it's not meant to be technical, the best test is to go and read it out to people in your family, especially people from previous generations, and see how they reacted and how much they understand of what they know, right? So how you can benefit from traditional formats essentially is that, get into the habit of tweeting, get into the habit of sharing posts about your science, right? If you start there, you would have taken at least one step towards being able to communicate your science in a non-traditional format, right? So that's the direction that you should think about sort of moving towards. And of course, make it a point, make it a habit to talk about your research on social media so that it improves your alt metrics, right? Now, if you were talking about alternate ways in which your science can be represented and where that science writing essentially applies, your blogs and press releases are perhaps the most powerful tool, because once you master these two, you should be in a really good space to kind of be able to talk about your research or write about your science in a non-traditional format, right? And it will help increase your global visibility. It will bring the interest of funders in some cases, and it will build your network, which all of you understand the value of at this stage, right? And of course, like I said, I can't harp on alt metric enough. It will improve your alt metrics. Some good examples of folks who do this. Frontiers is one that does it really well. Frontiers has actually gone the extra mile, and they take hardcore science and they make it kind of contextualize. They contextualize it for kids. I don't know how many of you have heard of Frontiers Young Minds. If you haven't, please take some time out today and go look up Frontiers Young Minds and see the wonderful work they're doing to educate children about topical and slightly complex scientific aspects, right? And they do a great job of it. And of course, the other example to show you is the way in which, say, Nobel laureate like Dr. Yamanaka sort of tends to constantly write about his research, tends to post about it. And last but not least, if all of this also doesn't convince you, there are various frameworks all over the world that ask researchers to constantly showcase the impact of the work they've done. And you can't do that by just talking about your science in the way in which you write a manuscript, right? It has to happen by being able to write sort of science in different ways and formats. So the research excellence framework is a good example of one that requires people to demonstrate impact or showcase impact in writing, right? And of course, there are other guidelines in places like Japan, Australia. I don't know how long it's going to be before India has one as well. So what all of this means is that it's now more important to communicate your science more effectively than ever before, right? And if you want to do that, the one format which I think you need to practice the most, right? Because not all of us are going to be in institutions where, we're going to have faculty members who can help with this, or not all of us are going to be a part of institutes where we're going to have a press office handy, right? So today, in terms of being able to look at the art of science writing, I think what's important for us to understand is the basis of how a scientific press release or a research news story is written. Because once you understand this format and you learn to practice this format, right, it will kind of stream into you being able to write greater stuff on social media. It'll also be able to teach you how to sort of write your science down in a way in which it can be carried by, say, mainstream news media. And if you learn how to write the research news story, again, it can very, very easily be repurposed into either a blog, or you can repurpose it into a plain language summary, right? So for us to understand what that is, right, and this I think will be really, really sort of important to everybody attending this today, is that what is a research news story? A research news story, if I can maybe give this to you from an anecdotal example. When all of you open your Times of India newspaper and you look at the page that's just directly opposite the editorial that exists, right? There's one column which always carries a science story. It carries sometimes carries very quirky science stories, right? That is created, or that is written based on a research news story. And a research news story is nothing but a research paper written in a newsy, non-academic style, so that a journalist, when they comb through certain portals, and I'll give you the names of the portals that journalists comb through, don't worry, right, that they comb through to find their next scoop, to find their next article to put down on the science column. If you go and read The Guardian, or perhaps if you check out the BBC's news columns, they have very, very fascinating science sections. And the quality of the research news stories are absolutely fantastic, right? But that, honestly, even today, is the first avenue / portal through which science is made public, right? So it generally tends to describe the broad applications of somebody's research and the impact involved and the motivation for why somebody carried out that research, right? And they are super, super effective based on the examples that I'm showing you folks here, right? They provide immense traction and publicity. They open avenues for people. I've seen a good press release change people's lives. It makes a huge difference to the profile that they've created, right? So with that in mind, right, and this is essentially what everybody came here for, what goes into a good press release, right? So let's move on to an annotated example, okay? I'm just going to switch that off, right? How many of you can see this manuscript on my screen right now? Now, how many of you could perhaps very quickly, 2-minute level, because we have to get on to everybody's questions, right? And I'd be happy to answer those. How many of you could quickly sift through the abstract and tell me what this paper is about in the chat tab or the Q&A tab, one of the two places? Just checking the Q&A tab. Right. Nice questions. Right. Something to do with tissue, they say. That's in the right direction, definitely. But when you read this, right, when you read this app, so the title, honestly, I'll give the author a lot of credit here, because the title clearly explains what the study is about, right? It talks about titanium serving as an instant adhesive for biological soft tissue. What does that mean? Right? What does that mean? If I'm not a material science person, or I don't study biomaterials, what does this actually mean? And that's where the beauty of a well-written press release actually comes through, right? Because I've shown you the paper, I've shown you the manuscript. I am now going to show you the annotated press release. Okay. Read that. Titanium glue, a novel adhesive for biological tissue to replace sutures. So that's what the study is about. It's about using a novel adhesive that can stick to tissues and eliminates the need for inserting or removing or worrying about the dissolving of sutures. That's what the study is actually about. So a good press release always opens with a catchy title that tells the reader exactly what they need to know about the study they're looking at. Right? It's not. So that title that you saw in the manuscript, it was catchy. It was easy to understand. But does it tell you the full picture? It does not. Right? But this press release, this will tell you exactly what the real picture is. Somebody has come up with a novel adhesive for biological tissues, and this can potentially replace the need for sutures. The next section of a press release, right, is a short sentence that summarizes relevance. So you have the title that's catchy, you always have a short sentence below that, like a subtitle almost, which captures relevance, right? And there you contextualize the relevance of why the research is important. So Scientists develop a new titanium film, which can serve as a biological adhesive and could be a revolutionary alternative to surgical sutures. Now, automatically, it piques my interest because the next piece, right, is the background. It's the problem statement. And you guys recognize this quite well because we write this in all our abstracts, right? We have to provide the background. We have to do the context setting, right? So you talk about the title, you talk about the relevance, and then you share the background, right? So here you talk about how sutures are widely used to seal surgical wounds, but they high risk of infection. You also have tissue adhesives, organic glues that can stick the skin back, but they have their own drawbacks. Scientists at X university have developed something that's unique. It's using titanium, and the adhesive can instantly adhere, right? And is expected to have multiple applications to medical devices, implantation, everything. So automatically, I know the possibilities of this entire thing because of the problem statement I'm looking at, right? So I've told the story. Now, in 3 paragraphs, I know why this is important. In 3 sections, I know why this is important. Automatically, now I want to read the rest of it, right? So then when you get into the meat of the press release, the first paragraph talks about a general introduction, following which you have information, right? Which people already perhaps know. Then you're talking about the technique of the study itself in a plain sort of lay language fashion. You can see here, we're not talking about, if we're talking about stitches, we're talking about glue. We barely use the word adhesive. We always use the word glue because there's an association with the word glue. The moment I say glue, somebody understands what I'm talking about, right? And yes, of course, in some places, you can't avoid it. If you talk about polymers and ceramic, you have to mention those because that's the only way to describe those words. But you see how it moves from here, right? You bring about, so you essentially start, you talk about the relevance, you talk about the background, then you talk about, then you provide slightly extended background, you talk about the research gap, essentially, right? The problem statement. And then in very plain language, you talk about how you chanced upon this discovery that you've made, titanium. So how can titanium work in this context, right? Then you introduce yourself, you bring yourself into the story, or you bring your group into the story, right? To answer this question, team of researchers led by so-and-so from so-and-so department explored whether a chemical modification of a titanium surface, right, can give it glue-like properties. And using these modifications, right, they've kind of utilized this to create something that they call titanium glue, right? Again, it's catchy. Titanium glue. Automatically, I'm wondering what this is. Why? How has somebody made titanium glue? Titanium I associate with anything but glue, right? And then, of course, spend a little bit of time talking about the methodology because you're validating everything. Everything is scientific, okay? And stick to the facts, stick to the truths, okay? I'll give you a funny example, and I can tell you about that separately. And yes, at the end, you want to basically, when you come close to the ending, right, when you're about to close your press release, throw in some of your own quotes, some of your voices in there, right, where you say, I felt like, this is what we needed to do, and that's why I did it. Because at the end of the day, you're the hero of the story, so you should probably be in there, right? And yes, we talk about the eventual outcome of the study, right? And you end on like a hopeful note where you say that this is just the start. I'm going to find, or my next goal is to look at XYZ things as we move forward. And I think this is what will really make a difference to the field that I'm in. And this is what I hope to achieve one day. And that's how you end it, right? That's how you structure it. That's how you end it. And having all these elements in place makes for a fantastic research news story, right? So I've shown you a very serious example, right? Now let's move to something that you will not forget. If you couldn't retain everything that I discussed in the previous aspect of it, read this. I hope you guys can see it. right? And this is the framework that you need to sort of keep in mind, right? And people tend to use puns because puns are interesting. Puns or a funny line catches someone's attention, especially a journalist who's looking through hundreds and hundreds of these, right? So you want to write it in a slightly quirky way so that they pay attention, right? You talk about them saying something, fascinating, stunning, right? So as long as you follow this template, right, or you try to go back and sort of utilize the template, I'm guessing some of you must be taking screenshots at this point, right? To keep this handy, please be my guest to go ahead and do so. But as long as you keep doing this, as long as you kind of follow this format or try to write in this format, right, you will be able to nail, or at least if you use this particular piece, right, if you just use this guideline document to write and keep a sense of humor about you as you do it, or keep a sense of sort of grounding in you as you do it, I think you'll benefit. I think you'll benefit from it. And I think over time, I feel like you should take an interest in being able to so-called consistently do this as researchers. You should take an interest in doing it as a researcher, right? So yeah, what a lot of people do is that they combine a press release with some graphics, like a graphical abstract. Some people invest in infographics, and it makes a huge difference to, again, the pickup that a paper has, right? So when you create a press release like we have here in this example, it kind of goes really far, and it's posted on platforms like Eureka Alert, right? That's one of the predominant sort of spaces to post your press releases. And you can see the kind of reach it has. Kind of turned up on Google News. And yeah, picked up on a really good altmetric score. If anything above 50, 60 on altmetric is really, really good for a piece of niche research. And yes, when you convert it into a press release, again, another example, you see a jump in altmetric numbers. So yeah. So we're almost at the end. And it isn't just about writing press releases. Once you learn to write a press release, you can actually, it's quite easy to kind of shape that. If you eliminate the elements of the code and you kind of turn it from third person into like neutral, like you don't use, I mean, you don't introduce a person, or you take away the reportage tone of the entire equation, you'll be able to quite easily turn it into a plain language summary. So if you're able to kind of work on the research news story as an alternate content format, if you take that away from the session, right, you can take bits and pieces of that research news story, work it into a social media post, convert it into a you can convert it into a plain language summary, right? And you have journals who specifically invest in wanting to have short form articles like the American Association of Neurology. So whatever gets created, like I mentioned, like I promised, I tell you about a few platforms. Medium is a very common platform where people host their research news stories. Phys.org is of significance to physical folks in the physical sciences. Science Alert, again, is a general platform. And Eureka Alert, of course, is like I mentioned, it's a predominant platform to post and keep your research news stories so that, journalists can pick up on it and so-called post it online, or, run a story with it essentially, right? And like I said, it makes a humongous difference to people's lives. And this is actual feedback that I've seen from a scientist that I worked with personally. So this is what being able to adopt an alternate style of writing can do for you as a researcher. That's the importance of what it is able to do for you. So if nothing else, maybe go back today and commit to being able to write a page about the work you've done in a lab in just plain English. Doesn't have to be complicated. You're not going to nail the research news story or a plain language summary or any of those things immediately, but can you write about your science for the love of the science that you have? Is that something that you can do? And if you can do that, I think you've taken a significant first step in being able to change the way in which your science is written and the way in which your science is communicated. So that brings me to an end of this presentation. I'm very quickly going to jump to the Q&A section. right? Okay, so a lot of questions here. I'm going to start with the one at 1017, which
Chief, do
says,
you mind stopping the screen share so that?
sure, I'm going to stop the share. Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead. Take the question.
Yes, give me 1 second. I'm just going to have a look. There are quite a few. Let me just have a look at that. Okay. So somebody says, how can I approach writing a manuscript as a story? Okay. The way in which you can approach writing a manuscript as a story, the simplest way, in my opinion, to do this, the simplest way, in my opinion, to take this forward is to think about the contribution of that paper in its most fundamental terms. Like, say, for example, I was working on the discovery of a pathway which could result in the so-called dehiscence of a rice grain to come through faster than normal. Right. So how do I contextualize that? Like, how do I contextualize a molecular pathway that leads to, dehiscence of rice grains much faster? And I realized that the way in which that works is that being able to create a strain that's able to dehice much faster allows for a shorter harvest time on the rice, or it shortens the period of time that people have to spend in processing rice grains, right? So I kind of brought it down to its most fundamental aspect, like what is the actual real world application? And if it's not a real world application, you need to think about what is its application to the field as a basic piece of research. What needle is it moving forward? I think that's the question that you have to perhaps sometimes think about, meditate, retrospect, whatever you find comfortable, and arrive at that answer. Once you arrive at that answer, which I, in my mind, a lot of the times call, like in my mind, I call it a log line. Once you arrive at that one line, which is the importance of your study in the most basic form, why is your study important? Right? Once you arrive at that one line, telling the story around it will become much easier. So arrive at the line first and then tell the story. It flows from there on in. Uh, some folks ask about how can one switch from academia to science journalist? So are there any specifications required? Not really. You don't need any specific qualifications. You need to essentially be able to get in touch with somebody who can get you an internship at least, right? You want to start with an internship. You want someone to get you a foot in the door. And you should have a body of work. If you want to get into science journalism, you don't need to be a journalist, but you need to at least have like a Medium page with all your written articles or some sort of profile of all the writing that you've done, so that you can pitch it to somebody and say, hey, could you give me an opportunity to do it? At the very start, perhaps it's not going to be very lucrative. You're going to be, an intern. You're going to learn the ropes. And then from there on in, perhaps you can choose to freelance and write articles for people based on the kind of reputation you've built, or you can take up a full-time role. But I don't know whether science journalism exists in that capacity, right? So, okay. Okay, the next one is, what's your method of simplifying jargon in the papers that you edit? You have to think about how the answer to that question is you have to think about how a person will relate to a densely scientific term. You can't really talk to somebody about, you can't really talk to somebody about, you can't really explain RT-PCR to somebody, right? But you can tell them that it's important, that you tell them that it's the best way to do it because it gives you the most reliable results in the shortest time frame, right? So nobody actually ever asks about or checks about what RT-PCR actually is and what it's actually meant for. A lot of people believe RT-PCR was brought together to test us for COVID, right? So how do you simplify jargon? You think about how a common man would relate to this piece of technology, or how a common man would relate to this piece of, what is the easiest way in which they would relate to this piece of scientific knowledge that I have? What is the easiest way, right? How would my grandmother understand this piece of, right? And if you can understand the terms and terminologies that you need to explain that discovery or explain that piece of technology to, say, your grandmother or a bua somewhere that you have in the family, right? I think that will help you arrive at ways to describe it without jargon, right? Now, running out of time. How can freshers connect with Cactus Impact Has for Work Experience? Cactus has a careers page in which we post openings for interns, and full-time positions and things like that. So you can go there and apply. I think it's cactusglobal.com/careers. You can find out there. I want to get into science editing. Do you have any background, but don't have a background in science? It seems very challenging. Do you have any tips? Well, it starts with being able to check certain platforms like the Scholarly Kitchen. That's a blog that you should probably check out because it talks about trends in the scientific and publishing industry. Go check out those spaces, get into the habit of writing. And again, as I mentioned before, build a body of work that you can showcase to other people. What's my perspective on rising plagiarism in science from the nation's renowned institutions and researchers? My perspective is that it probably happened because they were under pressure to publish. That's my view. When you are in a situation and you have to deliver something and all you're given is an option, or the only option you're given is to deliver, then you're going to do something desperate. And this happens not just in renowned institutions in this country, it's happened in renowned institutions in other countries. It's led people to suicide. My only advice is don't go there. Sort of avoid that scenario over time. Somebody said, what's the trick to creating interesting headings or titles or sounding too clickbait? Like I said, you have to ground it, right? I recently came across a story where somebody ran a press release about one of the IITs that made a discovery about something regarding rhododendron and how it could mitigate some effects of COVID. And NDTV ran it as, Sanjeevani Booty could potentially cure COVID. That's how they sensationalize it. So the best way to not sensationalize something is stick as close to the truth as possible, but simplify the truth. Don't oversell it. Simplify it, don't oversell it. Otherwise, you're going to put yourself in trouble. So that's what you need to factor in. So that's it from me. I've eaten into 2 minutes of the session for the next speaker. So thanks everybody for joining on a Saturday morning. I really, really appreciate it. I hope you folks got something out of this session. If you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Shruti, pass them along. If she can give to me, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much and have a great weekend. Shruti, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shane. It was such a pleasure listening to your talk. And I must say that this is perhaps one of the few sessions that we were able to cover all the questions by the audience members, which were really useful. And thank you for being so candid in all of the answers. And we really appreciate the time and efforts that you put into this session. Two compliments that we received for your session in the chat is that this was a very insightful session, and can the slides be available for later, because it's very, very useful. And I just want to tell our attendees that this session is live on YouTube and can be accessed later. And if you have any questions for Shane, please do drop them in the Q&A box, and I'll make sure to relay the same to him and make sure that the answers are live relayed back to you in due course of time. So thank you so much, Shane. It was such a pleasure hosting you at ISF, and we really hope to host you in the coming years too. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
And that brings us to the end of the first workshop. I hope it was really useful for all of you. And the second session that we're going to start with, it's past 11 a.m. And to all the new attendees that have dropped in, the second session is going to be about a very, very pertinent topic, something that is very relevant to the times that we live in. And Shane's talk also mentioned about the importance and the relevance of social media today in marketing research. And for the same, I'd like to invite Dr. Shivani Shah, who's going to be taking us through the second session for the day. The talk is titled Using Social Media to Market Research. A very quick introduction of Dr. Shivani Shah. She's the content head of Impact Science, and of course has received multiple degrees across multiple streams. She's done her bachelor's in microbiology and biochemistry, her master's in biochem, her doctorate in immunology, and has done 2 postdoctoral fellowships And it's really lovely that we have the opportunity of hosting Dr. Shivani Shah at the festival for this session. This is the second time that Dr. Shah has joined us, and it's a real pleasure hosting you once again. Just want to tell all our attendees that if you have any questions, Dr. Shah will take them towards the end of the session. You can drop in your comments in the Q&A tab, and we'll make sure to relay them to the speaker. And with that, over to you.
Thanks, Shruti. That was a really nice introduction. I'm really happy to be back here. I think it's been exactly a year since the last one, and yeah, it's nice to be back. So, without further ado, Shane, that was a really nice talk, and I think some of the material that I'm going to share today is probably something that you guys have already heard about in Shane's session earlier. But nonetheless, let's just go through that. Let me start with sharing my screen. Let me know when you guys can see. I hope this is
all visible.
Okay, great. Okay, so as Shruti already introduced, the topic for today right now is going to be about how you can market your research, especially using things that we're already using every day. Because most of us are on social media at some form, some platform or the other. And that's what today's session is about. So in the past couple of years, we've seen how things have changed so dramatically and how we've moved from real life situations to the digital world. And I think most of us appreciate the need to communicate science, to communicate what we do, how we do, to a larger audience, right? But I'm also guessing that this doesn't come naturally to many of us. And it's probably intimidating for many of us to kind of go out there and talk about all the complex work that we are doing. And I think I was in that same boat, long enough ago, I guess, when I was in academia. And as Shruti said, I'll just give you a brief thing on where I am today and where I was several years ago. So I have a PhD in immunology, and I've done 2 postdoctoral fellowships. And honestly, during this period, as a PhD student, as a postdoctoral fellow, I found writing very difficult. I procrastinated till the time when I didn't have a choice. I had to write that paper. I had to write that dissertation, right? But it was always something that I would keep for the back burner because 1, I was not confident I could do it. And 2, I honestly didn't realize the importance of being able to talk to people about what I did, right? I was so passionate about my science, about my research, but that was the extent of, where it ended for me. But in the past several years since I've, joined Cactus and Edition, I've got the opportunity to really write papers, write manuscripts, and enjoy the process. I've really come to this term today where I'm like, manuscript writing can be fun, it can be enjoyable. And even more so today now, when I'm on the other side of publishing, right, with impact science, we've gone beyond publishing to a point where we promote the research that other scientists are doing, other researchers are doing. And today I manage a team who writes the content for not just like simple, not just, I say simple, but not just breaking down complex papers into, easy to understand formats. So we make visual summaries and case summaries. But today we're also doing, we've gone one step beyond. So we drive content for marketing and branding, publishers, this is all for publishers, for institutions, for organizations. So it's more than just the researcher society, right? We've gone beyond that. And the aim is to impact everybody who is associated in science, okay? So that was about me. And I think before I continue ahead, I'd like to do my first poll. Shruti, if you can just launch out the first poll. The reason I want to do this is I want to understand my audience. I want to see where all of y'all are in your journey as a scientist or elsewhere. And this will give me an insight. So if you've already published or are in the process of publishing, you'll really understand how manuscript writing can be challenging, right? Maybe you're still writing your manuscript or you're anticipating on writing one soon. So you guys can just take this poll, give me a little insight about who my audience is today. While you guys are doing it, I think as researchers, you will feel the publishing process as being just as challenging. But as I talk more about the session today, you will also see that it's way more than publishing that we really need to think about today. Right? So are you guys all taking the poll right now?
Yeah, let me just flash the results on your screen.
Sure, that'd be. Okay, so we have a really mixed bag here. We have about 26% that have already published. Yeah, that's really great. And I see that there's a similar, subset of y'all who are still, in the process of either writing or to be writing soon. So great. You guys have already witnessed, I guess, part of the, the science journey where publication is important. Yeah. Now I'm going to go on really talking about, one second, I think. Right. Okay. So what's next, right? All this while you've been thinking about publishing your work and thinking about why it's important and what we need to do about it. But as we go ahead, you'll realize that it's not just about publishing. And it's not just about publishing in good, high impact journals. It's about publishing frequently. And really, the way forward is communicating it well as well. So you publish, but then you also need to talk about it, right? And I say this because, let's go to the next one, right? I say this, and I'll come to that in a little bit, but why do we publish, right? We're publishing all this work. Why are we publishing? What are our goals? What are we trying to achieve when we publish a manuscript? Well, it's to advance, scholarly knowledge. It's to communicate effectively with your peers, right? And at the end of the day, for most of us, it is to progress ahead in our careers, right? We all understand that we have to publish to move on. And why do you think it's important to promote your research? Right? Well, to become visible. You want more people to read about your papers or about the research that you're doing, to make your research accessible. And you'll understand this, in my next slide, as I tell you, I give you the numbers in the bigger picture, right? Career progression is something that we talked about, but it's also the more people who read your work, the more people know you, the more people you meet, the more people you collaborate with, right? So these are all at the end of the road in our science journeys. We're going to need the money to do more research, and the more you are visible, the more likely you are to get more funding, right? And at the end of the day, for many of us that we're really passionate about our research, we're passionate about what we're doing, and the goal is really to make a difference, right? Now, this is what I was trying to get to a little while ago as well. So why do we need to go beyond publishing? Why do we need to take that one step ahead and communicate about it? Well, today, the global scientific population is huge, okay, and it's increasing on an everyday basis. We've got millions of researchers out there. And what do these millions of researchers do? They are writing, they are doing research, they are publishing their work. And all of this is being written and published in millions of articles every year. And I'm sure, if you think about it, the past couple of years, this number has probably exponentially increased. And just with the sheer volume of information that we want to share, that we're trying to get across to the audience at large, like to everybody, not just to scientists and researchers, but to everybody. We're talking about COVID, we're talking about treatment, we're talking about diagnosis, we're talking about what is happening to people with COVID and with people with COVID and other things, right? So this is just a really small, I want to say it's a small drop of water in an ocean, right? The number of articles that are out there. And you'll see that the number of journals are also increasing. We're already in like thousands and thousands of journals. And these are thousands and thousands of good journals. So it's not even like any random journal that someone has put up. These are all high-end index journals that we are all buying to get our articles published in, right? So where does that put your published manuscript? It's one drop in that ocean, correct? And to find that drop and to have people read that one drop is what the challenge that exists today. Okay. So if you write a paper like we do today for academia, we follow certain norms in academic publishing. And no matter how well we write it, how nicely we think of our title, or how well we bring our abstract together, at the end of the day, that paper is going to have some technical information, right? Because that's how academic papers need to be, right? But do they always have to be this complicated, right? Yeah, as an academic paper, it probably has to. But what else can you do? What can you do to take this further, right? And why is it not enough just to publish that paper as is? So let's ask this question. Okay, you're deciding where your manuscript needs to go. Okay, and let's say you found a really nice journal A, which is open access. So again, being open access itself is good today because more people have access to your paper, and the paper isn't sitting behind a firewall somewhere. So it's open access is a reasonably decent impact factor of 2.3. Okay, it's peer reviewed because obviously that's where you need your manuscript published in a peer reviewed journal. Where and who is this going to impact? Right, your publication is going to reach within that community of scientists who read that paper. Right, it's going to be within a niche audience. Now, say you have an option to publish in a journal B. Now, Shane mentioned this as well, and I'll say it again in my talk, is that today a lot of journals are trying to go the extra mile. They are trying to add more value to the research that they are publishing. Okay. It's, in a way, it impacts their readership, right? But at the end of the day, it's also helping the authors. It's also helping more people, the science community at a large, right? So we have several journals now that in addition to publishing a manuscript, will also either allow you to put up video abstracts or infographics or plain language summaries, but they'll also at their end perhaps promote this content out. So it helps everybody in the long run. But at the end of the day, if you had these two journals, right, that you were trying to figure out where you want your manuscript to go, right, journal B is going to have a wider impact, right? Because more people are going to see, they're going to probably access the video abstract or infographic and be like, oh, this study seems really interesting. Maybe I need to go look at the paper or go see what the study is all about. So the impact is going to be on a wider society, a diverse audience that may include industry or policymakers, funders, media even, that who will then be able to access your research. Right? So I think all of you will agree with me when I say that journal B, I'm not able to go to the next slide. Journal B will you're probably going to be able to make the most out of your findings with publishing in journal B, right? So, but there is more that you can do, right? It's not just, you're not just dependent on that journal. You're not just dependent on journal B to take your science ahead. There is more that we can do at our ends as well. So the manuscript can be jargon heavy. It could be technical because it requires to be but can we make it easier? Can we simplify it and talk about it at our end, at our, in our capacity, without necessarily the help of the journal, right? And before we go into the real meat of today's session, maybe I will do one more poll here at this point. Shruti, if you can launch the second poll. This is really for me to understand where you all are in terms of with your comfort level. So here you are meeting your school friends after a lot of, after many years, and you want to discuss what you're doing. You're all talking to each other about, hey, I'm a scientist, and scientist sounds really cool, but now you are left with this huge task of explaining what you do, and you need to explain to them, hopefully in something short and sweet. But if it was you, do you think you could do it in a couple of sentences, or are you going to need more time? Or do you think you just can't explain it because your science is way too complex and there's no way you can explain it to a bunch of, lay people? So let's see where you guys all are in this science communication journey. Okay, great. So we actually have 30% over here who feel they can talk about the science in a couple of sentences. That's amazing, and there is, I think, only 22% who are not confident of breaking it down. So I think for those who fall in this last category, into the C category, maybe something that you all want to keep in mind is be prepared with this explanation. Right? You never know when it's going to come in handy, because it's not only just to lay people or to your friends that you may want to describe your research. You never know who you meet when, and that little spiel that you may have ready may go a long way in getting your foot in the door to something that you want to do next. Okay, so maybe spend some time on it and think about how you can simplify your research. Okay, contextualize it with something that's that other people can relate with. Okay, not all the science we do is cancer or COVID, right? There's so much that's happening that's extremely important to society as a whole, but it's really how you can explain that. You can contextualize what your research is about and how it impacts others. And sometimes it doesn't impact others, and that's fine, right? It could be something very fundamental, but that fundamental science is also really the foundation of something larger down the road. Okay, so think about how you can spin your story, make it more interesting, and have that little, have those couple of sentences ready in your head, because that can go a long way in being prepared for whoever you meet, whenever you meet, and in your future journeys ahead. All right. So moving ahead. So promoting your work, like I said, really is going to help you in a lot of ways, and one of it, and primarily, really, is going to be it kind of helps to find a drop in the ocean where your work is now standing out beyond just that published article. And you're going to reach out to more people. It's going to increase the impact of your work. It's going to increase your reputation as a researcher, because honestly, that's how people are going to really know you and know what you're doing. It's also the way you speak about your research, right? How passionate you are and how convincing you are at the end of the day to what you're doing and why it's so important and so thrilling, not just to you, but perhaps to who you're speaking to as well. Okay. And yeah, it is 100% going to help you with new opportunities down the road. Because at the end of the road, at the end of the day, it's really how you present yourself. It's how you talk about anything and everything that matters when you're thinking about collaborating with other people or even just looking for new employment. Right? Right. So coming now really to the crux, how do you do it? How do you get here? Right? One of the easiest ways is social media. Okay. Most of us are on some social media platform or the other. And it just means that you need to be a little more proactive about what you're doing. Okay, so you can go out to any of these platforms. You can tweet about it on Twitter. You can put up a post on Insta, along with a little image that or a graphic, whatever that conveys what you're working on. You could take this to Facebook because you'll have your friends there. Facebook, in fact, you can just post your graphical abstract that that you've created for your paper, that for your publication. Okay? And you can even, and I think for me, I feel LinkedIn is perhaps has way more potential, because that's where you're going to interact and network with others in your field or even outside your field, right? This could be anybody else who's looking at your page, and you can, if you have something there that talks about your work, it could be not just your work. You could put up a post about the meeting that you've attended and talk about this session that you attended at ISF, right? There's so many things that you could do on social media, and make use of this, right? Make use of all these opportunities that you may have. You don't need to go to every platform, just any platform that you're comfortable in. And you can possibly reach out to other people who are, in the same spheres of research, who might be interested in the same topics, and it will allow you all opportunities to interact, to collaborate, etc. Right? Another thing that you could do is blogs, and I think Shane talked quite extensively about blogs as well, where it's another opportunity for you to just talk about what you're doing in your words. It's yours personal, in many ways it's your personal space, so you could talk about it in any way that you want to, in any way that you think others can understand. And it's also a good way to start, because when you read it later, right, with whatever you've written, and you share it with other people, you really understand how much other people have understood as well, right? So that can be your not critique, but that could be your feedback loop, where you share your blogs with other people, and then you really understand how much they understand or they don't, and then you go back and tweak your stories and improve upon them. Right? It's a good place to start, especially if you're thinking about science communication as a possible future career goal. Okay. Now, then we're like, Shani, okay, you've told me all this, but what do you do? How do you go about it? Right? How do you approach using social media? So first of all, you'll have to figure out what you want to say, right? You'll have to think about really condensing your findings, your storyline, whatever it is, into something that's going to be that small bite-sized thing that you can post. Okay. And it's important that you think about your message very carefully, because that's what everybody's going to read about, right? So you want to make it in a manner that can not only interest other researchers in the field, right, but also just in general, make it interesting, make it casual, that your friends can understand, right? And then there are all these opportunities to talk more about it. And with science, I feel the more we talk about it, the more we collaborate, more ideas come about, and it just makes science so much more interesting. It's not just you sitting in your cocoon, or you and your PI maybe really, talking about what you need to do next. But it's all about what is out there, and the potential that your study has, or your findings, can lead to. Okay, and those things really come about when you talk about it, when you discuss with other people, you get more inputs going on a regular basis. Right. So if you've published your article, you can and you should include a link to the paper, because then again, more people are going to look at that paper. Use hashtags. They are an amazing way to draw attention to your post by people who are interested, in those niche little fields. So use your hashtags and use them well, because it has great opportunity to go places. Right. Mention people whose attention you want. So for instance, you could tag, say, your PI, you could tag your institution, you could tag any organization that you may have collaborated with. All of this again is, drawing attention not just to those people and organizations, but also to other people who are following those people and organizations. So again, it becomes like a networking thing, right? You can talk about your research journey. So it's not just about published article or a presentation that you're working on. You could just basically share what's happening. That could also be one of the posts, or part of your posting, your messaging. And one of the most important things that really is there is images. I mean, we've had the saying forever, I think, where one photo or one visual representation is equivalent to 1,000 words, right? And I strongly go by that. I mean, and obviously it needs to be something that's relevant. It's not just any image that you post, but a relevant image can go a long, long way in conveying your message. So even though you have only, say, one line that you can post about, that image is going to talk. It's going to go a long way. So include those images whenever possible. Okay, but make sure that they are copyright free. Okay, so don't just take images from anywhere and post them. You want to make them your images. Yeah. All right. So how do you use social media effectively? And I think I've already touched upon some of this on my last slide, but I just want to reiterate. Okay, so one of the first things you're going to have to do is you should follow key individuals or organizations. And I think it's very important to develop that network, to kind of have that built in, that whatever posts you are doing, whatever posts you are writing, obviously you have your own followers, but then that you need to also follow other people that interest you. Okay, and make this your daily routine. I think that's something that may not come naturally again to a lot of us, but if you can spend a few minutes every day, comment on what's happening in other people's spheres, and also post your own. And that way you're active and people are following you, and people know then when you posted something and posted something relevant, right? So post regularly and share your updates. It could be, like I said before, it could be not only your published articles, it could be your presentations that you've given. It could be a conference that you've attended, or a webinar that you've attended, or any of those, right? Use shortened hyperlinks. A lot of times when we want to add hyperlinks, we put in the whole thing, and it's really long, right? And that takes up a lot of space. So you can go to bit.ly.com and get a shorter hyperlink, right, for whatever you are sharing. And what that does is that it eats up less space on your post, and it's also, user friendly. It's easier to look at. Okay. Hashtags I've already touched upon in detail, and like I have photos and graphics. These are definitely something that I would stress upon for higher impact. Okay. All right. So again, a little recap on how social media would help you. So increases your global visibility. More people out there have access to what you're doing and why you're doing it. Has the potential to attract funders and collaborators. So if you do it right, these opportunities will come up, and it's a great way forward for your career. So once you're connected with like-minded researchers, the opportunities they increase exponentially, right? So that all kind of goes around your network building, and it's not just in your current employment, but possibly future employment as well. Okay, and it improves your paper altmetric, and altmetric is something that Shane explained really well in his session. But just to give you all like a short reminder, so what is altmetric? Altmetric is essentially another way of analyzing the outreach of your published articles, right? So earlier it was all about the impact factor of your journal that you publish in, right? How about the number of citations that other people have cited your paper? But in the end, is this enough? No. Today, with social media and with all the other things where people are talking about science, talking about published articles, it's not enough. That impact factor and citation numbers are not enough. And you need to go beyond the world of downloads and views as well. You need to talk about mentions and how how media outlets are talking about your work. And this includes blog mentions as well. So to make the impact of one's publication more holistic, that's what the altmetric score does. And a lot of journals, a lot of publishers are now actually using altmetric or equivalent scores in their larger picture. So they're using these to convey the impact or to consider the impact of a certain published article, right? So higher the score, obviously, the better your chances are in terms of saying, oh, my paper has had this impact in real world, right? Okay, so like a quick snapshot of how it really works, how research communication strategies are really playing a role today, right? So the center of it all are you as researchers, publishers and organizations, institutions, right? All of these are now talking to media outlets. It could be science media outlets. So these are press notes that are being released on published articles. It could be going towards your own personal media, so web pages and blogs, whatnot. It could be mass web media, right? Like magazines, newspapers, and then your 2 bits, right? What are you doing about it? Social networking, right? So all of these, at the end of the day, all of these feed into science, into your careers, and into how the science community as a whole is going, right? Is growing and going, I should say. Right. So what can you do more? Like how do you play your research into different formats? And I've stressed upon on visual formats a lot, right? And Shane spoke to you about writing, and I'm going to talk to you about visual formats, because I think at the end of the day, when you include a visual format, it talks volumes. It talks way more than a write-up. So we've all heard about graphical abstracts. I'm assuming most of us have encountered a graphical abstract either while trying to publish our own papers, or the journalist asked for it, or you've seen it in published articles as well. So what is a graphical abstract? It's basically, it's a nutshell. It's your science, it's your findings in a nutshell, right? We've probably had to create posters for conferences or just displays within your institutions. Those also talk about your science, but both graphical abstracts and posters are likely to be a little more technical, okay? Because you're talking about your science for a certain set audience, for a certain target audience, and therefore these are invariably more technical, right? But you have infographics and videos, right? These could be, again, depending on your target audience, these could be way more lay friendly, right? And these are also representations. These are also visual representations of your paper, but perhaps in a more holistic manner, right? And I'll go into each of these in a little more detail in the next few slides. And then there are these other formats as well, which I'm not really going to cover in today's session, but there are podcasts, right? These are audio formats, and you probably all come across some podcasts or the other. But what podcasts do is it allows for communicating your work for scientists on the go, right? People who are multitasking today, who are doing A and can listen to your story simultaneously, right? And podcasts are really, they're much in favor now. So a lot of journals and publishers are doing them, and you can find different sources to really hear other scientists' work. And lastly, are the lay summaries and research news stories, which again, we've already heard about in the previous session, right? All right, so touching upon the more visual formats, and first and primary is the graphical abstract. So here's an example of graphical abstract, right? It's really basic, okay, but it conveys the story in a manner that if you look at this graphical abstract, you know what was done in the paper, okay? So it essentially explains the key takeaways of the study, and it's really a focus on the findings and how the authors have got there, right? So it's a little bit of methods and a bit of findings, right? And essentially the takeaway message from the study. And as you can see, it's very minimalistic in terms of text, but the graphics kind of help in telling the story, okay? Posters, these are way more technical. I really feel that posters, depending again on where you're using them, are likely to actually include real figures from your study. So these aren't really summaries or simplified representations of your findings, but these are actual figures that you're going to include in your poster, right? And here you're explaining the study in a very academic manner. So it's meant for other researchers, perhaps other researchers in your field even, depending again on where you're presenting the poster, right? So here you're going to include direct data figures from the study. And what a poster does really is, the goal at the end is to allow for interaction and collaboration. So you want to talk to people about your work you're doing, and it allows that one-on-one really where others can come talk to you about what you're doing and how you've got there, right? But this poster also basically allows you to summarize all your work and go away with some key findings from your study, okay? Infographics, and this is really where I want to take more time in explaining and giving you all tips on how you can create your own infographics, okay? Because I feel infographics are more lay friendly, and while you can put up your graphical abstracts and posters on your social media platforms, they might be really understood by only some people, right? Other people within your fields. But an infographic has scope to reach out to more people, because they could be technical, but you can easily make them very, very lay friendly, right? So what is an infographic? And for those who don't know what infographic is, basically it's a complete overview of your study, okay? So in the graphical abstract, I said you focus more on methods and results. But in an infographic, now you're talking about, you're giving context to your study, because remember, you want to reach a wider audience, right? So you want to bring in certain elements that that talk about why this topic is interesting before you go into the actual topic itself or the actual study itself, okay? Again, it's a visual representation, and again, it has minimal text, okay? Now, what I've done here, these are just some really pretty generic examples, right? These are just styles, honestly, that an infographic could the way you could present your information. No, an infographic would be a single element. So you have everything central, right? So your main image is in the middle, and then you have information about each of the elements on that central image around that key graphical representation. But you could also make it more linear and more organized, right? So here you have the same information, right? But in a different kind of a layout. So there's many different ways in which you can showcase the same story and put it out in an infographic. Now, how you see your study or your findings and how you feel you can best showcase that information is really where your communication skills come. That's where you're going to need those skills. right? And you could try around, you could play around with these and see what works best, right? I'll just give you a little insight. So infographics can be various sizes. You could possibly make it many different layouts. You could have landscape, you could have portrait, you could do square. But think about where you're using this. Think about if you're using it in social media, for instance, what do those platforms allow? Do they, because they'll allow you to put in certain sizes and dimensions. And at the end of the day, you want to think about other people viewing these on the phone, right? So you want to see if you have a lot of information in your infographic and it's landscape on your phone, there's only so much that somebody can see, right? And that's going to make it harder for someone on a smaller phone to see and read and understand and take away. So think about the dimensions that work best, where everything can be visualized easily without having to zoom in too much, right? And again, like I mentioned before, infographics could be technical or simple. And really at the end of the day, you need to consider where these infographics are going and who is going to read it. Who is your target audience, okay? This is a very generic, layout that you could use. If you're doing it landscape, this works when you talk about the title. You have a little bit of context setting. The content that you put in the background will kind of rationalize why you're doing the study. And then there's a brief methodology so that your results make sense. Really. That's the essence of it. And you put in your results, again, they need to be just overviews of your results, okay, without going into too much detail or making it very complicated to understand. Because remember, no matter what you put up here, you're not going to have space to put in figure legends and things like that, right? So don't use figures straight from your paper, because that's just going to make it way more difficult to understand. Yeah, simplify it, represent it. So say you have your study found increases in, say, protein A in this condition. So just contextualize that into and try to visualize just that little bit without showing a graph and showing how protein values have increased over time, or how the protein values differ in different tissues, etc. Right? And yeah, most important is key message. So as you can see, there is a huge chunk of your infographic that is saved for the key message. Okay. And some of the other things that many of us don't focus on are these things that go into the footer space. Okay. So if your manuscript is published, you do want to put in your manuscript title. You do want to put in your publication details. So put in your DOI, because that's the one identifier that everybody across the world is going to identify your paper with. Right? So include the DOI, include the author information, because what you're doing at the end is you are promoting your research, right? So it's not just the story you want everyone to know. You also want to know that this is published in X journal, right? And that they can go and read the full paper if they're inclined to do so. Okay. And a nice thing to do is to include either the journal logo, right? Or if actually more than the journal logo, I would recommend that you put in your institutional logo, because here you are now also promoting your institution, right? And you can say that this work was done in this institution, and this is where I've come from, right? Another thing you can include in the footer is your social media hyperlinks or your institutional hyperlinks. Again, what that can do is it feeds into that network system that I was talking about earlier. So in a way, this is how we tag other people and get other people not only to see your work, but kind of feed into the followers network. Okay? Another thing that's becoming very popular today is the use of QR codes. And I don't have one on this slide here, but But what we've started doing for many of our clients and for many of our authors is to include a little QR code over here, right? Which when scanned can take the reader to either your web page, okay, or to the paper itself, or to the institution or to the department, whatever, wherever you want these folks to go and read more about you or your study. And that's a great way to pack in a lot of things in that one infographic, in that one visual that you create. Okay, so these are just some examples, and there's really not much that I want to talk about here because I've already covered all these elements in the past slides. But if you can see here is the title, right? And then all of this here is context setting. So you have a line on what the background is, what is known, right? A little rationale as to why we are doing this study. We have details on how the study was conducted. And at the end, the results. And the results, if you notice, are taking up a lot of space in the infographic because really that's what you want everyone to take home, right? That's the essence. And of course, the key message, the one line that you want everyone to read and to remember what the story is about, what your findings are all about. Okay. And you'll tell me, Shivani, a lot of it is this is so similar to writing a paper because it's the same sections in many ways, right? With the background, you have you rationalize the study, so you have your objectives or hypothesis, you have methods, results, and conclusion. And yes, this essentially is the same format. It doesn't have to be, but a lot of times in a scientific breakdown, it makes sense to follow the same format because it makes the story flow in a linear, straight manner that everybody can understand. But at the same time, it is way more simpler than your paper, okay? Because with the visuals, with the way the story is presented, it just makes it easier for someone to look at this infographic and within a span of, 3 to 5 minutes that it will take you to read the whole thing, you could grasp a lot more about this study than it would were you to read the paper or even just read the abstract for that matter, right? All right. These are just a few more examples, and I think I'm running out of time. I actually lost track of time. But these are just a few examples, and you can make them really interesting. The infographics, you can make them very interesting and fun to, where other people will want to come and read your paper, not just read this, but actually go back and read your paper as well, right? So really quickly, what an infographic is, it's a snapshot of the whole paper, the entire study. They're easy to consume, they're easy to understand. They are, they obviously have graphical elements, so they have a high recall value, and essentially they're easy to share on social media, and they contain obviously your key takeaway message, okay? Don't just go with what I'm saying. These are now real examples of how social media has helped. Okay, so we create these infographics for the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery, and then they go and post them on their Twitter and YouTube. Now, this is just one example, right? And you see here that the infographic that they've posted has been shared again, retweeted, and people actually comment on how this is such a great way of summarizing the paper. Okay. This is what we've done for the Royal Society of Chemistry. And again, they've gone and posted on Twitter and Facebook. And really at the end of the thing, the important thing is that these stories are shared with others, they're retweeted, and there's a lot more engagement at the end. Just like infographics, we you could create a video summary. This is a little more detailed because it's a narrative, right? So you have a script, you're telling a story in not just one static graphical representation, but that it's moving, it's got animation. And again, this also has minimal text. Now, I'm not going to show you a video because there isn't enough time. But basically, it's a 2 to 3 minute narrative representation. And this goes a really long way in, again, capturing the essence of the entire paper. And, it's easy to understand, again, high recall value and really easy to share on social media. You just have that link out there. People can go look at the video and, really understand what your story is all about. Okay. So again, something that we've done for Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery. And you can see that the number of views, it's really high, just within a span of 2 weeks. So it goes a long way. A lot of people are liable to view and they enjoy it and then they pass it on, and obviously the views keep increasing. Right? So what is the impact at the end? Well, there is a higher engagement, whether they're videos, they're infographics, and in general, there's just way many more interactions and clicks, right? It goes one step further. We've talked about altmetric scores, right? This is an analysis that we did. And what you can see here is that the number of articles, right, that were published without infographics resulted in an average altmetric score of 2.6, right? But those with infographics, you can say the score is almost double. And the ones that had infographics and videos, see, this is an exponential increase, right? It's 6 times higher than the articles without infographics. So definitely there's a huge impact of what these visual formats can help you achieve on your articles. And it's not just the altmetric score, right? It's also citations. So if you go back and see how many citations these same articles have received, and it's the same thing here again, you see that there's a dramatic increase, a 5-time increase, in fact, in the number of citations on articles that have both infographics and video summaries to accompany them, right? So when that journal gives you an opportunity to put up a video summary or a graphical abstract, infographic, please make use of it, because it will go a long way. And then these are also things that you can share on your social media and just add to that entire cycle. All right. Again, this is what has been traditionally the focus in science, that you publish, you have a core audience who are reading this journal, and essentially that's the end of the story, right? It's a one-way communication, article being read by the author, right? With very limited engagement, because only those authors are reading the paper. But today, there's so much more scope, right? We have so many different things that can go along with the article. And once we add in social media to this entire grand scheme of publishing and communicating, and then now we just have this huge feedback. Right? So we have articles being written, authors reviewing it, and then talking about it, all within the social media realms or within the news journalists realms. And at the end of it, the outcome is that so many more people have access to the study, to the findings, not just to peers, but also just the lay public in general, policymakers, funders, you name it. It's just accessible now, right? And it reaches a wider audience. So keeping this whole cycle going, right? It's now no longer one way, it's 2 ways, it's multiple formats, because you could have visual elements, you could have lay summaries, you could have podcasts, and just everything just adds on to a much better engagement with a much wider audience, right? Just 2 bits at the end. Who is this going to impact, right? It's not just going to impact you. It's also going to impact the publishers, funders, and policymakers. But at the end of it, as you've seen, all of this, all of you, publishers and funders, policymakers, all of you all form the essence of the scientific community, right? It's all part of this all part of science. And at the end of it, it's a win-win for everybody. Okay. And I want to leave you with this thought, right? No matter how you think you sound, at the end of it, you need to let others decide how you sound, or let others decide what they understand of what you are doing. Okay. So try to bring your communication down to a point where people are really understanding and appreciating the value of your work, and we're going to go a long way with that. Okay. So yeah, with that, we'll take one last poll. Shruti, if you can just put this up. So yeah, after this session today, do you really think science communication is important? Let's see what the polls say now. Okay, so wow, we have 100%. That is amazing. All right, thank you guys. That's I feel like my job is done for today, but I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions. So let me stop sharing my screen and one second, and I shall take questions. Okay, so let me go to the start. Do the journals create video abstracts, infographics themselves, and is it for free? So a lot of our clients are journals and publishers, right? And they do sponsor these infographics and videos, sometimes plain language summaries as well. And they pick certain papers. So it's likely that even though, say, you have, for example, I mentioned the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery is one of our clients, right? Even if you were to publish in their journal, it will really depend on whether they pick your paper for these visual formats. So they, it may or may not always be part of your publication, right? But a lot of times journals are now offering the option to you as an author to upload a video summary or to upload a graphical abstract. So make use of these, because it might seem that it's optional and it's fine, it's okay, but at the end of the day, those things are what really are becoming very important for a mass appeal. Yeah. Are we permitted to use images from the paper as an infographic on social media, or are there copyrights involved? So yeah, you cannot use the image as is, okay, especially if the paper is published already, then the copyright is, unless it's an open access paper and you still own the copyrights to your paper, those figures cannot be used as is. However, having said that, it's so much better to adapt your figures. You don't want to show a bar graph. You don't want to show something very complicated. You don't want to show a heat map. You want to simplify it, right? You want to let people understand your visual representation like this without having to read, text, without having to read a figure legend. So try to visually represent your findings rather than using the data figure as is. Yeah. Who can we approach to create effective multimedia visuals? We do them, right? But obviously I'm not here to promote what we do. You guys can reach out. I feel today there are so many scientists, right? So many scientists who are very passionate about illustrative work, Okay, I personally know a lot of scientists who, in addition to obviously doing their PhD and all that, they create all these contents, and they can create it for you. I'm sure there will be some kind of nominal fee that you will have to pay them, but they can help you with this. So look out for scientific illustrators. There are other platforms where you can find, people who freelance, who are designers, who can create your visuals based on inputs that come from you. Okay. So moving on, from where can you get free copyright-free images for infographics? So so this is always a challenge. While you can Google, and Google gives you an option to look at licensing, right? A lot of these icons are available for free. So there are certain places like Freepik or Pixabay. There are, I think, Freethinker, and there, at least these that I know of that offer free icons. Okay, so they may or may not be fancy images, but definitely icons. I think Pixabay and Freepik also have stock images that you can use as well. Okay. Should the language on social media be formal or informal? So this really depends on who your target audience is. Who do you want to reach out to? Are you hoping to reach out to your friends who are on your social media pages, or are you trying to reach other researchers? So I would go with something that's semi-formal, but at the same time interesting. I think the bottom line is that you want to make it interesting, and you can go with that newsworthy, news style as well for your social media. So that's fine. And that makes it quite relatively informal, but at the same time, you do want to convey your story in a nice manner. Okay. I don't know if that really clarifies. It's not all about formal and informal. They're not clearly two buckets, but it's a mix, really. Okay. Can you suggest any software affordable courses that students can take up? So to create infographics, there are, again, it depends on your skill strengths. There is Canva. Canva offers a lot of simple templates and simple options. I don't think it is free though. You may have to check. You might have some trial level options and basic things that might be free. But Canva might be your best simple way. And if not, honestly, you have PowerPoint. Really, you can do a lot of things on PowerPoint. They may not be as fancy as what a graphics designer is going to create for you on, say, Illustrator, but there are options. And you can create your really simple but nice visual on PowerPoint as well. Okay. Again, who can be approached to create effective multimedia visuals? I think we've already covered this. You could approach companies like us, or or you could reach out to freelancers. I believe there are platforms like Colatry and Fiverr where you can find other graphics designers, etc., who can help you with your work. So yeah, I think that's it. We've covered all the questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shah. It was such a pleasure listening to this talk. And I must say that very, very topical in the times that we live in, extremely important for all researchers and budding writers and scientists in the audience here today, to make note of what an important role social media can play in marketing research. And thank you for shedding light on all the important aspects of creating infographics and video summaries. It was extremely helpful. And I mean, this session was back on sheer popular demand. And I can just hope that in the coming years, we're able to host you in a proper offline on-ground setting where you get to participate in our festival and help upskill all our attendees on a closer platform and engage with them on a more up-close front. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was really nice being back here, and I hope you guys have taken some inputs out and can take your communication ahead. So yeah, have a good weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. And with that, we are at the end of the second workshop at our PhD program booth. That the session was by Dr. Shivani Shah. Without any further ado, we're already running a little late, but I would love to invite Dr. Sunena Singh, who's going to be conducting the third session of the and is going to be talking to us about the importance of networking. And this again is such an important topic that needs to be addressed, because in the times that we live in, networking amongst like-minded peers, networking with people outside of the industry that we work in plays a very, very important role. Dr. Sunena Singh is here to talk to us about the same, and a little about the speaker for today. Dr. Sunena Singh is an academic trainer with Cactus Communications and has been working as a freelance academic editor, as well as for researchers in agriculture, genetics, and molecular biology for the last 9 years. Having had hands-on experience in science laboratories, lecture rooms, and the academic publishing industry, she loves to work closely with researchers and students to help them communicating their findings effectively and refine their research manuscripts to maximize the chances of publication. Dr. Sunena, thank you so much for joining in. Our attendees are very, very eager to hear more about how to go about networking. And I'll just hand over the mic to you and you can take it ahead. And of course, we'll take the questions towards the end of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shruti. And thank you to all the attendees today. What a wonderful way to be spending your Saturday. I'm so glad that I've got this opportunity, this wonderful platform, India Science Festival. Science is truly a celebration, and a festival like this is, amazing to be part of. So I'm going to share my screen. And let's begin. Okay, so I'm going to be picking up from where Shivani left off, Shane and Shivani. So networking is a very, very important part of your work as a researcher. And let's quickly dive in about the topic itself. So if you think about it, I found it quite interesting. It says the art of networking. So let's first consider, is it a skill, is it an art, or is it both? So a skill is something that you are born with or something that you build with practice. And art is how you use your skills creatively. So networking, of course, is a skill that needs practice. So some of us are blessed with that ability to, connect with people and just be very outgoing, whereas some really need to work on it. It does need practice connecting with people, and connecting not just with people from your field, but even people from other fields. And as I said, it's also an art. How can you use those skills to develop your own creative way to collaborate with people, to stand out so people notice you? So there's just one poll in this session. I'm really curious to know where my audience is at this point. Shruti might release a poll. Yeah. So are you a lone wolf? You like to work on your own and you think networking is not for you? Do you think you're okay about it? I mean, you have fairly good skills, but you'd like to know more? Or do you think you're really great at it? Let's see. Very, very curious to see what the results will be. Okay, very interesting mix of folks. So there are some lone wolves out there, but more than half of you would like to know more and you think you're decent at it. And there are some pros amongst us. Great, great. So we all have something to learn from each other. And yeah, moving on. Oops, I'm not able to. Okay, thank you. So great, that was fun. Right. So most of us over here are researchers, and let's understand why is it important for us to network, specifically those who are not very comfortable with it. Or so, of course, it's a no-brainer. It's very, very important for you to build your career. It's a very good way to connect with other researchers, collaborate and publish with them, and to build your presence. So this is, of course, offline as well as online. So this is, in this current day and age, I mean, it's never been more important to have an online presence as well, to be noticed. And both Shane and Shivani dealt with this in many ways as well. So I won't harp on that. To learn of the latest trends, what's the latest that's happening, not just in your field, but allied fields. Networking is also very important to connect with people from diverse backgrounds. So you get some tangential, unusual viewpoints and experiences that you can draw from. And you might end up making some very interesting connections and forging some very unusual collaborations for work. Even if you don't want to continue in academia, much as I transitioned out of academia, so to speak, and moved into industry and a freelance career, even then you need industry connections. So whichever point of the research life cycle you are in, you need to network. Now, some of us have this sort of mindset where we feel, there's a negative connotation to networking. Some of us feel it's inauthentic or fake. You have to flatter people or you have to suck up to people. Some people at the early stage of their career feel they don't have a network or an influential network to begin with. Is it worth even pursuing? Some people may feel it's a very selfish pursuit. You're thinking of your gains and your progress, and for that you're trying to reach out to people. Well, all of this is incorrect, I would say, because you need to change this narrative and change this mindset. Think of your role as not just taking, but also giving. Because networking is not a one-way street. It's a very two-way process. So there might be something that you have to offer as well. If you're an early career researcher, you may have some very, very fresh ideas, some very distinct opinions that you can bring to the table. You have a unique voice or perspective. So it's a very positive thing to network. Don't think that it's a very selfish, self-centered thing to do. It's very important to understand about the historical perspectives of networking. So when you think of networking, you automatically think of social media and email. But think back to the time of these very influential scientists in the pre-internet era. Did you know that letter writing was such an important pillar in science? It's quite amazing. So Charles Robert Darwin sent around 8,000 letters. And I'm talking about during his academic career. So not really personal, but yes, some of the letters were a mix of personal and professional back in the day. Einstein sent and received almost double of that. In fact, Einstein sent one letter a day almost on an average. And a classic example of a networker in science is Darwin. It's really appreciable. He used to write letters not just to his peers or academicians and experts. He would write to collectors, gardeners, naturalists, even diplomats and army officers. Why was he reaching out to them and connecting with them? All for his academic pursuits. So he would establish these contacts, and they would help him in his explorations or discoveries. He wanted to go into newer territories, and you need to have the right contacts to access certain materials. So networking is very important for us for that as well. You need access to certain, say, books or references that you're not able to access anywhere else, or materials that are protected, etc. Another point to note is that back in those days, these strong institutional structures were not there. So letters were almost like a way for people to bond in those kind of times. Very interesting role of letter writing back when women were not really offered positions. They were excluded from positions at universities and academic societies, but yet they led a very, very active academic life. And researchers like Darwin encouraged that through letter writing. So he would draw on their expertise, and he would even encourage their work in private through letters. I just happened to realize that Mendel and Darwin, two stalwarts in the field of life sciences, they were contemporaries. I didn't, realize that they were actively active in their respective academic pursuits at the same time, but they never contacted each other. In fact, Mendel was aware of Darwin's work. Darwin had no idea about what Mendel was up to. So it's a very, very interesting thought experiment. What if Darwin and Mendel had networked, gotten in touch with each other, collaborated? What would it be like? Biological science, I mean, the advances would probably have happened much sooner than they did. An example closer home, the man who knew infinity. So the great mathematician Ramanujan, wonderful example of networking. So he was, so this is over 100 years ago. He was working on his mathematical, I really can't understand his work. I'm not at all from a mathematical background, so I won't get into that. But in those days where communication was difficult, and even his education, he was struggling. This was during his matriculation. He reached out to a to a leading mathematician at Cambridge, Dr. G.H. Hardy, and he wrote this letter. It is a lesson for us. So I have just plucked out little snippets from that beautiful letter of his, how he begins with an introduction. So this was a cover letter accompanying like a lot of his work, paperwork on his formulae or certain things that he proved or disproved. He first gives a background about himself and his academic background, and then he goes on to say that he made some startling discoveries. Then he links it with Hardy's work. He says how he came across his work, and certain things resonated with him or didn't. Something about prime numbers and Eulerian geometry. I really won't get into that. Then he talks about his limitations, that he has some financially he's not secure enough, but he wants to have things published. And yes. So note the tone, the language, of course, is very different from how we would write an email today. But yet, this letter went on to change history because it led to a wonderful collaboration, a great friendship between Ramanujan and Hardy, and they did some excellent work together. Curiously enough, Hardy was not the first mathematician that he had reached out to. He had written about his work and his thoughts to many others, but they sort of didn't give weight to the work, or they didn't really recognize the potential. So talking about the two-way thing, right? Hardy being the superior in this case, was also a wonderful teacher, and he was able to recognize the potential of this person who reached out to him. And he was very eager to nurture talent. He realized that, okay, this man has something to offer, and if we work together, we could really, really achieve something great. So now coming back to the present, where it's not about letters, it's not even about meeting in person, it's about networking in a virtual situation. So while things are getting better, it's up and down, but networking is no longer really organic. These water cooler moments and serendipitous meetings where you suddenly bump into someone and make these connections at a conference or a meeting, that's not happening. So it is more important now than ever before to build networks. Another way to look at it is for some people who are a little shy, it's actually easier to connect online than in person. On the flip side, we have something like Zoom fatigue. It's an overdose, an overload of online input. So how can we make the most of this situation? So it's very important to check and enhance your digital footprint. Shivani also spoke about this. And besides that, your existing network, you have your existing in-person network, leverage that, build on that. While you maximize networking online, attend such events, and also be sure to follow up with people that you would like to connect with. So where, as a researcher, do you identify people that you want to reach out to? So, of course, you have the authors of journals and books, journal articles and book chapters, authors of academic blogs, university websites and scientific databases. You can, browse through the profiles and see what work is being done at various universities and departments. Scientific engagement platforms, very much like this one. Professional platforms like ResearchGate, LinkedIn, etc. And of course, conferences. So while offline ways to network include workshops, symposia, conferences, etc., and existing networks to expand, online conferences and workshops, reaching out to journal editors, building your online profiles, and also cold emailing. It's a very interesting word, cold emailing, where you just directly reach out to a researcher. And that is exactly what Ramanujan did, not via email, but via a letter. It was just out of the blue, someone reaching out to an expert. Reaching out to journal editors is a very nice way for early career researchers to build their presence by, if you express your interest in conducting peer review. So you should have published some papers. And this gives you that much needed recognition early in your career. So where do you begin? So find out where researchers are hanging out or interacting. You have online communities like Twitter conversations, Facebook groups, self-hosted forums. You could invite an expert to your institution to speak. That is one way you can establish a connection. And now it is very easy to invite speakers because they don't need to really travel. You could invite them to an online event. It saves more time as well. And make sure your social media profile is in order. And I'll be talking about that in a bit. And let's get into cold emailing. How do you email a potential collaborator? Make sure you have a clear subject line. So all the details should be there. You don't send an email with no subject, because whoever, these are busy people you are reaching out to. They should get an idea right from the subject line what the email is about. Keep it short. Nobody wants a very long life history, 3 to 4 paragraphs at most. Include a brief introduction with your academic background. Remember how Ramanujan went about it? your research interests and experience, and the justification why you want to work with this person. Make sure you include all your relevant publications, any references of people you've worked with, and something on the lines of, I have past research experience with so-and-so number of publications, etc. You will be sending out multiple emails to multiple researchers at any given time, but be sure that you customize those emails. Don't send a generic message to everybody. You need to tailor it according to every individual, depending on their unique work. What happens in these generic emails, you might make very embarrassing mistakes. So you might end up mixing up names or departments, etc. So make sure that every email that you send to one person, it should be for that person uniquely. Do not send generalized emails. I would like to add here that I got a lot of these tips from Twitter. So a very, very fantastic resource. If you follow the right people on Twitter, people put up these threads with hacks and stuff for researchers. So if you follow the right people, you can get a lot of tips. So I've mentioned the source at the bottom. Yes. So I thought this was very relevant. Consider the time zone of the recipient. You want to aim for the recipient to get the email first thing in the morning, because that's when typically we open up our laptops and start checking our emails. That's how we begin our day. Now, if the email comes towards the later part of the day, you're exhausted, the person may not want to read it then, and it just gets buried in a mountain of emails. Similarly, in terms of when you want to start the project, so there should be enough buffer time from when you are establishing contact to when the project may begin. So a couple of months in advance at least. So just a couple of tips, as I mentioned, avoid flattery. So something like your work is amazing or fabulous. Try to say it not in a way of a fan really, but almost as a peer or a colleague. So explain why you are impressed with their work. I like your work because it is, I was thinking on similar lines or something like that. And yet be polite and formal, and strike that balance of not being too formal and not being too informal as well. So suppose the researcher gets back and is a bit informal and says, don't call me sir, call me Richard, don't call me ma'am, call me Sue. So in that case, respect their decision, but your first email shouldn't be, hi Richard, what's up dude, kind of thing. So please, your initial emails, try to gauge the level of formality that they prefer. Even in face-to-face interactions, it's very important. Be patient and do not start bombarding the person with emails if you don't get a reply. Give them time. Suppose you don't hear in a week or two, maybe send a follow-up email. And even after that, if they don't reply, then you should get the message and sort of back off, or maybe try much later, something like that. So our social media profiles now, people, potential employers, collaborators will always do a background check. So make sure, number one, your profile should be up to date. Get some tips from other people's professional profiles and see how they format it. Use your skills, etc., as keywords throughout your profile. To get noticed, join group discussions and interact in the way of commenting, liking, tagging. So just be very, very regular in all that. It's important to keep growing your network. So there are some numbers which it would vary from person to person and field to field, but some say you should build 10 new connections every 3 months or so. So that's completely up to you, as long as there is some steady growth and increase in your connections. Showcase your work through social media. There are so many ways and means of doing that, as you listened to in the previous talk also. so many shareable little snippets. You have videos and infographics to share. Write a blog, showcase your work. Profile picture is an important part of your digital presence. So wear formal attire. That's not really essential. Just don't keep it too casual. Smile and so you look approachable and confident. Ensure the lighting is good. And it should be a high resolution, good photograph, not something cropped from a group picture, not a selfie, and up to date. So I just read about this funny anecdote about somebody who joined a collaborator. So she connected with him, and but when she met him in person, he looked like 10 years older than he was in his profile picture. So try to keep it current. Now, networking, a lot of it happens at conferences, especially for early career researchers. Why are they important? It's a good way to share your work, get feedback, a good way to place your work in the context of your field, hear about the latest updates, what's happening, because new findings are typically presented first in conferences, even before they appear in a paper. Good way to find a job, meet collaborators, funders, etc. You could learn about a new field. So attend a conference on a topic that is just about related to your field, but little distant. So if you ever want to branch out, or you want to conduct a multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary study, you could find very good connections for that. So as I said, very, very useful for early career researchers. There is a plethora of these kind of events. So choose the kind most pertinent to you, convenient to you. So you have traditional core conferences, symposia, and seminars. So seminars are a little smaller, probably just at the university or department level. Symposia are slightly larger than seminars, but focused on one particular topic, whereas conferences are broader. There are all kinds of new formats. Of course, there are the online conferences as well. There is something known as a write shop, common in the social sciences, where you meet and it's like a workshop where you, at the end of it, you actually develop a paper. In industry, etc., there are methods and development-based meetings as well. And at all these venues, try and figure out which is the format that suits you and your work the most. If you feel that in an online format, your poster has limited visibility, probably an oral presentation would be a better way for more impact, for more visibility. Now, how do you go about identifying where and when these conferences are happening? Your PI, your mentors, your peers and faculty, they would have some idea. So discuss with them, express interest that the next upcoming conference in your field, you are interested in attending. So how to go about it? Academic societies in your field, on their websites, on their social media, they will announce upcoming events, meetings, conferences. And there are some other conference listings you might find online. So the information is there, you just have to know where to find it. The first step in before you attend a conference would be to get your abstract accepted. So you want it to be accepted at the conference, you want people to be interested in your work. So it needs to be clear, concise, well formatted, and interesting. So Shane spoke a lot about how to make your work interesting, right? When you prepare for your conference, make sure you are well versed with everything about that topic. So know about the historical aspects, know about the absolute latest that's happening. And if you are well versed with all this, it will boost your confidence. You will be able to answer questions well. Make sure you have an elevator pitch so that will tell the person about you and your work in short. So how can you best explain your work to a person and have various versions of it, 1 minute, 5 minutes, depending on if the person is from a different field or same field, have it ready, practice it a couple of times. And yes, modify it according to the audience. Now we've been doing this for 2 years, yet there are a couple of times in these online events, some mistakes happen or some people just don't follow the ground rules. So let's just quickly revisit. For virtual conferences, make sure you familiarize yourself with the platform in advance. There are so many, there's not just Zoom, there's so many. So whatever the conference is using, just get a feel of it before the event. Familiarize yourself with the schedule, stick to timelines, check your audio, video, everything, of course. Minimize distractions in the background. Look into the, when you are talking, look into the camera, engage with the audience, move less, and avoid interrupting or leaving your mic on when somebody is presenting. And we've all heard about these embarrassing situations where while switching tabs, there is some sensitive information or something you don't want the public to see, but it, comes online. So be very, very mindful of these little things to make a good impression with people you are networking with. So keep your format in mind. In a poster, split it in columns. You can't have everything just, pasted like that. Ideally, it goes from left to right. Print your poster if it's a physical conference. Print your poster in advance, proofread it, check it. If it's an oral presentation, your slides should not have too much text. Practice, and this is all we already know about all this. How can you make the most of the conference's offerings so that you can maximize your networking? Attend as many sessions as you can. Not only is it a great learning experience, but you're going to meet newer and more people. Mingle around, get talking. Don't be on your phone scrolling. If you want to take notes, you can do it on paper, because when you open your phone, you will get distracted. So try and take notes with pen and paper. And these notes will become talking points when you discuss with people or ask questions, a good way to interact. Be friendly, make eye contact. If you're the kind of person who finds it difficult, just build on it. And if you find yourself tongue-tied and you don't know what to say, remember your elevator pitch, or just start talking about something you are most comfortable with. Offer your business card, and when people give you their business cards, quickly make a note about who it is, so that you don't forget later. And when you meet people and exchange business cards and talk about, hey, it'll be great to be in touch, make sure you follow up very soon, like in the next couple of days, so that you are still fresh in their mind. If you connect a month after the conference, that person may not remember, but they will be able to make that connection. Okay, I spoke to this lady yesterday, and okay, she sent me a LinkedIn request. So don't delay that. Very quickly, this is nothing new. We know about it, but sometimes we tend to forget these very basic things in an oral presentation. So one by one, understand your audience. Is it going to be young students, undergraduates, or more senior people? Are they from the industry? Are they going to be from drug companies, etc.? Really understand that your research is meant to be heard and not read. So you have to capture and maintain that attention that people are listening. They are not reading your paper as such. They're going to be listening to you. And all of us, we have limited attention span. So how are you going to hook the audience? Follow time limits. Generally, you will not be the only speaker in the day. There will be many. So respect everybody's time, the audience and the speakers. Rehearse. Because when you do it mentally, you go over your slides mentally, you don't get an idea of the time. It takes lesser time. Whereas when you speak it aloud, it actually takes more time. So either rehearse it or You can even record a video and along with the slides, do it side by side. In a physical conference, check the room in advance. So as I said, in an online setting, you check the platform in advance. In a physical conference, see the room, get a feel how big it is, what is the lighting, what kind of mic system is being used. So be prepared in case something goes wrong. How do you continue? Suppose suddenly the power goes. How are you going to continue to engage the audience? Don't get in a panic if something like that happens. Just be calm and continue. Any talk, any session, if you can hook them right in the beginning, you are off to a good start. So first impressions are always very, very important. The first couple of seconds or minutes really tells the success of how your talk is going to go, and grab people's attention and make a good impression. So smile. If you're feeling nervous, just take a deep breath. Be aware of your posture, very, very important. Body language does a lot. So avoid looking at your slides or looking at your notes all the time. That shows that you're not very confident. Give pauses. It should not just be a verbal flow, a river like that. There should be some pauses. Sweep your gaze across the room. That will even help you calm down rather than just staring at one point. And maintain a steady speech pace. One way to make your talk interesting, use a lot of transitions. So while these transition words or phrases in writing are not really encouraged, but while speaking, because you may use the same idea twice, you want to link back or circle back to something. So say a similar idea is, another example is, well, as I mentioned earlier, and if you're introducing a new section, you can pause or you can say it. Let's move on to the next part. To move on, moving further, having said that, there are a lot of these, use these phrases to just keep it a little interesting. Question answers. This is a session that, this is the part of the session that helps others really gauge your understanding. Questions may or may not be asked. So if questions are asked and you don't understand a question, it's fine. You can ask them to rephrase the question. Suppose you do not know the answer of the question, again, don't panic. Be honest. You can say, I'm sorry, I don't know right now, but I'll get back to you or I'll think about it. If no questions are asked, maybe give the audience some cues, some limitations in your study or something. Just try to get them talking. In case no questions are raised, it's fine. Just thank the audience and move on. Ensure a natural closing. When you feel that you have answered enough questions or you're out of time, ask if there are more questions, offer your contact information. Just sort of give a sense that you are nearing the end of your session. Coming back to how do you go about networking, you might ask. Okay, we know all about how to, these do's and don'ts of presentation, but I want to understand how to establish contact. So even before the conference, you plan who are the experts you really want to meet, prepare elevator speeches for those specific people, and have your business cards ready. So this is before. At the conference, participate in all the events they have to offer. There will be meals, there will be some outings and activities. Don't miss out on any of them because that's a great way to connect in a slightly informal, casual setting. Ask interesting questions. Don't only stick with your friends and colleagues and your team from your department. The idea is to not really hang out with the people you already know. So hang out with the authors, journal editors, etc. Once you meet them, towards the end of the conversation, just tell them, it was nice meeting you. I would like to get in touch later. When your presentation ends, don't leave the room immediately. Hang around because many questions that couldn't be answered may get answered then. You can continue your interaction. And it's a good chance for you to hand out, if you have any handouts, or again, your business card, etc. So how, I keep saying, make an impression, make an impression. How do you do that? You don't want to appear too needy or desperate. As I said, no fangirl and fan kind of project. Don't project yourself as a fawning person. Be confident and in what you are, what you want to achieve by establishing that connection. Have your starter and closer sentences ready. So you can't instantly jump into, your work is this and my work is about that. Ease into it, saying, what a lovely venue, or oh, today the weather is so strange, or something like that. So how have you been enjoying the conference so far? Did you travel by, there are all kinds of just ways to ease into the conversation and then get into the work aspect. During presentations, asking meaningful questions will get you noticed. So a well-framed question, something thought-provoking, will draw attention to you. Okay, so this person in the audience raised a very interesting point. And then that becomes a talking point for later over coffee or dinner or something you will be discussing it. Continuing about body language, according to some studies, some of which are controversial, so one by Amy Cuddy about power posing. I don't know what the controversy goes back and forth, but at least it works for me. It works for a lot of people, this thing of power posing. So before a presentation, before any event, just stand like that in private for a little while. It really helps. While interacting, make sure your back is upright. You don't cross your arms and legs and try to appear more open. While talking, some of us, I do gesture a lot. So while you're gesturing, make sure your palms are open and facing the person in front. There's a lot of information online on body language, etc. So I won't get into that, but it's a very important part of making an impression on someone. So just a quick run through. Try to adopt a networking mindset. It's a very good thing to do. It's not a one-way process. Information flows in both directions. Focus on not just what you can take, but what you can offer. Networking takes both time and effort, so take out time for that. Leverage all sorts of networking tools available today. Be very careful with personal social media sites. So while I said go ahead and connect with people on Twitter and LinkedIn, but Facebook and Instagram, if you feel they are posting a lot of personal stuff there, then maybe you could just back off. Also, on your own profile, try and not post too many, controversial or political ideologies. People are going to be doing a background check, so you should project a very neutral stance. At any event, make sure you read up in advance. Be well versed with your own science story. You should be able to, at the drop of a hat, tailor your pitch to anybody, a lay person, somebody from an altogether different discipline. Be ready with your story. And yes, networking does not come easily to some. You need to work on it. If you are nervous, if all those other body language tricks, etc., didn't work, it's okay to admit. You can say, sorry, I'm feeling a little nervous right now. And it can be very endearing if you, if you come across as vulnerable or you laugh at your own mistakes, it's fine. As I said, it's how you project yourself. You can be very creative in how you project yourself. So while it's a skill that needs practice, it's also an art. So try and see how creative you can be in improving your networking skills. So yes, that brings me to the end of my slides. And I just wanted to point out Darwin Correspondence Project and Networking for Introverted Scientists. Just have a look at this. Very, very insightful information you will get over there. So maybe I'll stop sharing. And if there are any questions. Okay.
Yeah, Sinan, there are questions in the Q&A tab, so you can access them from there.
Great, thank you. Can you share some icebreakers for online networking sessions? So if you are organizing it, there are lots of activities you can do. You can divide people into breakout rooms, and in those breakout rooms, it's easier to interact with a smaller group. So all those ice-breaking activities would typically be done by the organizers. But during your presentation, make it interactive, like how we had so many polls during the previous session. I included only one, but these kind of little activities or ask questions. So in online networking sessions, I think these you have to get creative at it. Off the top of my head, I could just think of polls, questions, maybe a quick game or some kind of activity. That's one. Okay. A BS/MS student of first year, from which year should I start networking? You can start networking right from today. Why wait? So establish contacts early. It may not be for a project right away, but you can start following certain researchers, interact with them, like their posts, tag them, ask them for advice. So it doesn't have to wait until you finish your master's or PhD. You can start right away. Okay, one person asks, networking seems like an extrovert's game. How can introverts or shy individuals go about it? So I did speak a bit about it, yes. It is a little challenging. It comes with experience and practice. So as early as you can, you start attending conferences. You will be very nervous for your first event, but you will slowly gain confidence as you keep doing it. What's a good age or time to start networking? Well, age, I would say, age, I can't really say, but I would say any time is a good time to network. We all network at a personal level, right? So if you're talking about personal networking, start as a kid. I mean, as a child, you make new friends, etc. in your building, in your school. But if you're talking about professional networking, start during your academic career. So during your master's is when you can start the journey. Very nice question. If I don't make a good first impression, how do I make a comeback? You know what? Very often what happens is when we make a mistake, say you feel you've made a big embarrassing mistake, it is amplified in your mind. Actually, the audience or the person you were talking to, for them, it doesn't seem as big as it seems to you. So you may feel you made a big mistake, but actually it's absolutely fine. Don't beat yourself up about it. Apologize immediately, maybe. And if you feel that person was really not impressed with you, it's okay. Just let it go. You will have more opportunities. Or as I said, accept your vulnerability. Accept who you are. You could go up to them and say, sir, I'm sorry, I was a little nervous at that point, so I couldn't explain clearly. Can you give me a chance to explain it again? Something like that. Okay, Simran asks, I usually avoid networking online as it attracts a lot of distractions and not so valuable conversations sometimes. In that case, how should one go about networking or not networking? So yes, any online activity is loaded with distractions. But I feel that in these 2 years, we have got enough practice to know how to prioritize. So, as I said, your digital footprint should be such, it shouldn't project that, say Instagram, you're posting pictures of yourself partying a lot, and that may give a different impression. If you want to post very personal things, maybe keep your profile private. So other people, when they check, they don't have a very biased view about you. So make those little compartments where you keep your social and personal life separate from your professional life. Similarly, you should not get biased by other people's profiles if they are putting up a lot of unsavory content. So I hope that answers your question, because you have to network online. I mean, that is going to continue to be a very important part, even once we get back to a lot of in-person events. Just keep your profile very clean. Is it more important to network with people within my industry or outside of it? Both. It's important, both, definitely. When it comes to online presence, a question often asked is it worth the time? After all, building and maintaining presence does take time and concerted effort. I'm so glad to be getting this. I really follow your work, Dr. Kaushik. So it's my honor to be answering this question. Yes, it takes time and it takes effort, but I think it is totally worth it. Because, for example, if not for your TTAS sessions that I've been following along with my son, that is because of social media. That is because of your online presence that so many people in my circle also now know about your work. So online presence, I think, has such a wide reach that in-person presence does not have. So yes, put in that effort, put in that time, it's totally worth it. Thank you, Dr. Kaushik. Please share some tips on how to handle difficult people, those with a superiority complex or rude or arrogant. As with any walk of life, personal or professional, there will be all kinds of people. So it's very hard to really say if there is someone you just cannot, you're unable to relate with them or gel with them, you feel uncomfortable because of their superiority or whatever. If it really your work depends on it, see if you can manage, but if it's unmanageable, it's better to get out of a toxic situation. So do not suffer on any account. How to make an impression as a high school graduate student? We don't have much of professional background. So if you're a high school student and you are doing some interesting school projects, for example, why not put it up on social media, or try to make connections and share whatever little work you've done. Did you know that there are even these journals that encourage work from students as peer reviewers? So there is Frontiers in, I can't remember the name, but it is specifically for school students, and they can peer review the work of senior scientists. I'll get back to you with that. It's a Frontiers journal. So there are these little avenues, and like India Science Fest, there are lots of science events. So make sure you attend them, participate in them. When you participate, put it up on your social media and practice your, since you're talking about high school, practice your oratory skills, go for debates, join clubs. There are so many opportunities, so don't let them go. Any other questions? Okay.
Right. I think that brings us to the end of this session. Sunana, you've taken more than 12 questions. Oh, we have another question that.
Oh, great.
How can one connect with one's PI or even lab mates, especially after knowing that they're not very welcoming?
Oh, that's a tough one. So probably first try to understand why is it that they are not welcoming. So maybe first think, did you not perform well earlier? Did you, were you in situations that, created a lot of conflict? So first look within. And if you're sure that there was no mistake on your part, maybe try having an open discussion. I feel that honesty really goes a long way. Rather than keeping it in and mulling over it, talk to them openly. So can we have a meeting? I'd like to talk about something. Maybe you could start with something like, it's my birthday. I would like to have a little get together, and then maybe talk about it. Just try and be a little. But again, as I said, if you are uncomfortable or if it's a toxic situation, maybe get out of it. There are lots of other labs and opportunities. So I hope that helps. One more question. Are there any online tools or software which can be leveraged to build online presence and maintain engagement with our network? Software, I can't really think of, but I would say just all the platforms that Shivani and I spoke about, LinkedIn, Twitter, of course. For researchers, there's ResearchGate also, a lot of online forums and discussion forums, etc. Software, I'm not very, I don't know about that, but it's a good thing to look into later. I'm sure if you just do a Google search, you will get the answers. There is lots of information. You just need to sift through it. Thank you all so much.
All right, that brings us to the end of this session. Thank you so much, Sunena. It was so insightful. I mean, just from a person who was listening to you at the back end, I think there were some pointers, I mean, very tangible things that you had listed out in your slides. And I must tell you that many of our attendees were dropping in compliments in the Q&A tab too. And
wow.
One attendee specifically said that these slides are extremely useful for them and if they'll be available later. So I just want all of you to know that this session can be found on YouTube. We've dropped the link already multiple times. I'll do it again. And you can access the video whenever you like on our YouTube channel. It will be available. So please do avail of all the wonderful content that Sunena has shared in this session with everyone. Sunena, on behalf of the entire team at India Science Festival, thank you so much for taking the time out and for wonderfully addressing some very pertinent issues that truly at a time where everything has gone online, things might be offline, online. We don't know how it will be in the coming years, but thank you for touching upon such important issues. I'm sure that all of our attendees have taken back something really useful from this session, and I'm sure that it's ignited sparks in the minds of all the listeners. So thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the session and
yes.
all the questions. And I really hope that we get to host you again at India Science Festival in the coming years, hopefully maybe in an offline setting where you get to interact with all the participants at a closer level. So thank you so much for your time. And on behalf of ISF, I'd like to extend a very big thank you to Cactus Communications, Researcher.life and Impact Science for partnering with us and curating this 3-part workshop series as part of our PhD program. Thank you so much, Satya.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
And with that, we've come to the end of our morning workshops. Thank you to everybody for sticking by. You've been here since 10 a.m. and it's been really lovely to host this session for all of you. And thank you for putting in the lovely questions. Just like to inform you all that we have, these are the last 2 days of our festival. The festival is coming to an end tomorrow night, and we still have some very, very exciting talks, workshops, panels, competitions and contests at the festival. So please do avail of this opportunity. You get to win exciting prizes. All of our events are free to attend and they're open for everybody. This evening at 5 p.m. we have a workshop on building a biofilm for kids. So that's a workshop that's going to be hosted by our partners Talk to a Scientist with Karishma Kaushik and Snehal Kadam. We are going to be hosting it in a Zoom room, but we'll also be relaying all of the workshop content live on YouTube, so stay tuned. This evening we have a talk on bringing together the worlds of archaeology, dance, music, and metallurgy by Sharda Srinivasan. We also have a panel discussion on the importance of research communications in partnership with Impact Science. And at night at 8 p.m. we have a very fun competition called Science Jam, which is just a minute, where the participants get to speak for 1 minute on very quirky and fun topics. So that will also be a super fun session to attend. Tomorrow morning, we have a drawing competition for everybody. It's open to all. We also have a fun contest for kids. It's called the Online STEM Games Day. It's in partnership with our knowledge partners Luma World, and they are going to be hosting a very fun online puzzles and codes game where you get to beat the pandemic. We might, we can do it online and the games are for families. It's a family event. You are welcome to join in with your kids, your peers, your families, and please do make sure to avail of all the opportunities. In the evening, tomorrow we have a panel discussion on bringing together the world of science and cinema. We also have a session on the science behind Indian cooking. And of course, a panel discussion, the final panel discussion of India Science Festival tomorrow is going to be about the contribution of Indian science and technology in the globe. So how is Indian S&T contributing to the world in the coming years? What role do we play? What significance do we have in the global context? It's a very exciting panel discussion, and we have some wonderful speakers joining in. So make sure to tune in. You can head over to our website, www.indiasciencefest.org, and you can also follow us on our social media channels for more updates. Thank you so much for